Hey everybody, and thanks for joining our live stream here. Back again with a new live stream for 2022. So happy New Year's to everybody that's joining us here on the stream. There's been, of course, a huge number of announcements this week so far with, of course, CES going on. And as one of those big, of course, announcements has been the introduction of another range of chipsets for Intel's latest generation 12th Gen series CPUs, or the Alder Lake series of CPUs. I think it's a really exciting opportunity for those of you that are a little bit more limited in terms of your budget for builds, because you have the introduction of non-overclocked based CPUs, which are still going to be able to offer really great performance. And you've got some really feature-rich chipsets with the new B series, B660 and then H670 based chipset, which I think are going to be some great options. And that's really what we're going to be focusing here on this stream, is diving into essentially the new motherboards that we have for the B660 chipset, the H670 chipset. We're also going to be talking actually about 3 new SKUs that we've got to further enhance our current Z690 base series of motherboards, specifically with an ROG STRIX model and then 2 TUF Gaming models, all 3 of those being DDR5 variants. But that also brings, I think, into focus one of the really interesting things about these new B and H series chipsets is that many of them are going to be focused at DDR4. So for those of you that kind of want to hit that balance in terms of not only accessibility, but of course at lower cost, but still getting great performance, DDR4 is still a fantastic option. And most of these boards are going to be featuring DDR4 support, but there will be a couple of boards that will still feature DDR5 for those that kind of want to move into the next generation standard when it comes to memory. So in this stream, we're going to be talking about those new boards. We're going to be diving into understanding some of the differences regarding B and H and Z series chipsets, where there are differences and how that might affect you when it comes to building your system, overclocking factors, whether we're talking about CPU overclocking or we're talking about kind of performance tuning or DDR overclocking, as well as also, of course, looking at all the different aspects when it comes to general kind of feature set that we bring to the table when it comes to new motherboard launches. So thanks for everybody joining us here on the stream. Thanks, Erica, for joining us here and letting us know everything's good on that side. Mark, also thanks for joining us here. Richard, also thank you so much for joining us here on the stream. So fantastic to have every you guys in here. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to go ahead and drop those into the comment section, and I do my best to go ahead and address those as we move through the different items that we're going to be talking about in terms of the different motherboards and the features. We also do have Juno from our product marketing team, so she might be able to catch some of your questions as well. So if you throw out a question, you can feel free to go ahead and see if you get a response from Juno as well. And last thing, least, is that you can also make sure to check out our ASUS PC DIY Facebook group. It's a great community that we have, over 30,000 members that really are passionate PC DIY builders, from first-time builders to dyed-in-the-wool seasoned enthusiast builders, from water cooling to small form factor builds to content creation to overclocking. We've got really just about every single type of user in that group, and it's a great space to be able to talk about kind of builds, questions, be able to get insights, or also find out the latest and greatest from ASUS, as I am the admin of the group. So if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and check us out there as well, and I will make sure to drop a link in the chat in a little bit there also. All right. Hey, 36 Bounce. Hey, Jason. Thanks so much. Awesome to know that you've got a great experience there with your B450F. Hey, thanks for joining us. So let's get ready to go ahead and jump into some of these general kind of premise points. First things first. So let's talk a little bit about kind of Intel's 12th Gen series kind of motherboards, right? And ready support. So the first and foremost kind of most important thing to keep in mind is that when we're talking about 12th Gen series CPUs, those are utilizing a new socket. So when we're talking, of course, about the socket, if I bring this motherboard here into frame, that is what I'm referring to. This is the LGA 1700 socket. So this is not going to be compatible with any prior generations. We still do get questions from users kind of in the community asking about whether or not the prior CPUs could kind of be supported if they find like a deal like on a 10th gen or 11th gen series CPU. Essentially, no. Any of the CPUs that you're looking to introduce into the B series chipset, so B660, H670, or Z690, does need to be a 12th gen series CPU. The really exciting part, though, is going to be that, of course, with the introduction of new CPUs that are non-K series CPUs from Intel with the launch of these 2 chipsets, well, actually 3 chipsets if we also count H610, is going to be that the price point and also the kind of the range is really, really, really exciting. So when we talk actually about the effective range, we are talking about not just, of course, the flagship series CPUs like the Core i9s, the Core i7s, but Core i5s, which I think are going to be really popular, and then even the Core i3s. If we talk about the effective range, what we're looking at overall, I think I took a note here. Interesting, right? So yeah. So with the Core i9, we're talking about looking at 8 8 performance cores and along with 8 E cores. Then on the Core i7, you would have 8 cores along with 4 efficiency cores. Core i5 would either be 6 performance cores plus 4 efficiency cores, or just 6 6P cores. The Core i3, which I still think is going to be a very popular based option, is going to be the 4 performance-based cores. And then even on the Pentium and the Celeron side, maybe for you guys that aren't necessarily looking at gaming systems, but maybe just looking for basic productivity systems, maybe looking, a code box, a VMware box, maybe different types of more kind of low power, not necessarily high performance-based systems, although the architecture and performance is pretty impressive considering that these are quote unquote Pentium and Celeron based parts. Those are going to be dropping down to 2 performance based cores. But the really interesting kind of part here is going to be if we take a look relative, I think, to the overall price point, right? It pretty much swings all the way up to almost about $500 if we talk about like a 12900 a class part, and then we go all the way down to a $42 part with the dual core Celerons. So that's a pretty big swing in terms that now when you talk about 12th gen CPU support, there's really a lot of options. So the exciting part is going to be that I think that you'll really be able to find not only a motherboard, but also a CPU that complements of course, your selection for a motherboard, where before, you had the 3 key kind of K series CPUs that were available with the 12900K, the 12700K, and then the 12600K, which they're all still fantastic parts. But this is, I think, where there's going to be a lot more flexibility for users to really look at different types of options. And for me, I think the most interesting SKUs are going to be the 12400 and the 12100. I think those, for a lot of gamers that are going to be looking to be able to build a cost-effective system that gives you really good performance, isn't going to be limited in terms of gaming, and still helps to really give you a lot of kind of the key specifications that this chipset and platform allows for. Those are going to be some really good offering. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But let me go ahead and just see if we have any questions in relation to that before we kind of go into the next item there. $36. So how many boards we'll have in DDR4? I need to double check in terms of the totality of the entire lineup, because of course we do have DDR4 boards for Z690, and then we also have DDR4 boards for the B660 and the H670 chipset. The important thing, and actually this is a good time to bring this up, is that any of the motherboards that we have within our lineup that have actually a D4 designation within their name is the easiest way that you'll know that that model is actually a DDR4 based model. So actually, let me go ahead and bring up our landing page. So this is essentially kind of like the page that we have that leads to all of our motherboards that we have available within the kind of 12th gen series CPU support lineup. And we actually have a really cool kind of specification table, a list that shows you all the boards and allows you to kind of compare and contrast that. So let me go ahead and just show this to you guys here, and we'll keep moving this thing along here in a moment, but give me 1 second. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just show you this, guys. And let's take a look here. Okay, so we are taking a look here at our Z690 product page, but this actually also now includes all of our other motherboards within that lineup. And so here you've got a nice breakdown, a lot of the new kind of features and functions. You'll see that they're actually broken down by different series. If we go to currently the TUF Gaming series, well, we're introducing some new models that will actually be DDR5 for this series, where previously Z690 only offered DDR4 based models. You can see right here that the actual model name notes TUF Gaming Z690 plus Wi-Fi D4. So that D4 designation essentially means that it's DDR4. If you were to see a name pick, for instance, like here, where it's the ROG STRIX Z690-A Gaming Wi-Fi, and there's no designation, that's a DDR5 based motherboard. And of course, the product page specification will clearly note to you whether it's a DDR4 and DDR5. And again, it's very important. You cannot pick different types of memory and run them in the different board. You have to pick either a natively DDR5 motherboard, or you have to pick natively a DDR4 based motherboard. But in terms of the naming convention, again, if you're looking for a DDR4 based motherboard, just make sure that it has that D4 designation. And if you're looking for a DDR5 based motherboard, it will not have that D4 designation. Now, the item that I want to talk about right here is actually this cool full specs. So if I click on this full spec information, you'll see that it actually brings up this really cool spec table, and this spec table includes pretty much a breakdown of all the motherboards that we have within the lineup, and gives you kind of all the information that you would want in terms of easily kind of comparing and contrasting the motherboards. So it's a really nice, useful feature. So I will go ahead and link these in the comments for you guys if anybody's interested in checking out that information. And these will link back to all the respective models that we are talking about. So you're going to get covered one way or another. So I have dropped the link there in for that landing page in the chat. And I will also go ahead and link that specification table in the chat. And I will link these for those of you that are checking out this stream on demand afterwards. I will make sure to also go ahead and link these in the description. Okay. Okay, great. So that covers us there. And again, to recap your question, let me just quickly do a quick count here in terms of just what we have and help to kind of give you some specificity to the question that you had in terms of the actual number of boards. So give me 1 second here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we'll have a total of 12 motherboards as part of these new series of chipsets. But that will also include H610. So that's a much more entry-level chipset for the kind of the basic series chipsets. If we're not going with H610, we'll just reduce 2. So that would be 10. So 10 boards in that. So you got quite a number of options that you have available to you. And some of the variations actually between the boards that we're going into, as simple as just whether the motherboard has Wi-Fi or does not have Wi-Fi. Okay. So hopefully that answers your question there. Let me go ahead and just see if we got any other questions there before I go ahead and head back there. Yeah, so don't worry about RAM speeds. We're going to actually talk about that when we get a little bit into the actual motherboards themselves. But this is actually one of the next points that I did want to go ahead and actually talk about here is when we talk about kind of the differences between kind of the chipset support and kind of overclocking support. So when we talk about B, and H, and Z, historically in the past, B and H series chipsets had what was referred to as a locked memory divider along with a locked CPU divider, and so or multiplier. When we mean by locked CPU multiplier, essentially that means that you cannot support overclocking the CPU on the motherboard. There will be some performance tuning options that we'll talk about that are B series motherboards and H series motherboards do feature technology that we call ASUS AEMP. This performance tuning option will essentially allow you to have kind of enhanced power limits that are defined for the CPU to be even able to get better performance. So this can be really exciting because it's going to help you to take the kind of the performance of a 12400 and push it to even a higher performance level. And it really takes advantage of the higher quality power delivery and the thermal solution, the thermal design that we have on the motherboards. So that's a pretty cool feature. But when it comes to the memory, Intel's Alder Lake-based CPUs, the memory controller that's inside the CPU supports both DDR4 and DDR5. And the cool thing is that Intel has enabled unlocked DRAM divider support. This essentially means that you can run higher memory frequencies. You are not limited to the default memory frequencies. So in the past, these essentially frequencies were lower. But if you want to go and pick up some higher speed, DDR4 memory, whether it's 3600, whether it's 4000 megahertz, 4400 megahertz, you can definitely do that. And actually, you'll find that the vast majority of the boards we're talking about have actually readily been validated for very high frequencies when it comes to DDR4. But because this is a more budget-oriented platform, in terms of kind of a budget at a lower price point, right? I think that probably for most users, the still sweet spot is going to be for most users probably somewhere between 3600 megahertz to probably about 4400 megahertz. That's where the pricing is still fairly reasonable in terms of kind of the DRAM. Once you start to get much faster than 4400 megahertz for DDR4, you're going to really increase the cost. For DDR5 has extraordinarily high frequencies that are possible. Even on these more entry-level series chipsets, it's still quite impressive. So you can still definitely run much higher frequencies. But as always, it is important to keep in mind that the memory frequency is determined by the number of DIMMs that you're running on the motherboard. So as an example right here, if we're taking a look at the motherboard, you can see on this system, or also here on this system, which is a Z690 based system, I have 2 DIMMs installed. 2 DIMMs can run at much higher frequencies than 4 DIMMs. So it is important to keep in mind that if you're looking to potentially run like a 4-DIMM configuration, you may have to go with a more conservative memory frequency than if you're going with 2 DIMMs. 2 DIMMs, you can actually readily look to have much higher frequencies. You could be talking, not only the baseline of 4800 megahertz, but you could be looking at over 5000, even 6000 megahertz is entirely possible with 2 DIMMs. And we have actually a really great video that we have on our YouTube channel that features actually a function that we'll have on our motherboards that we'll talk about called AEMP, which actually will allow you to take non-XMP based memory and essentially performance tune it to get better performance. So like an example is this stick of memory. This is a DDR5 stick. runs at 4800 megahertz, but through our AEMP technology, we can actually have it run at either the same frequency but much tighter timings, or still tighter timings but a much higher frequency. So we could have this 4800 stick run actually at 6000 megahertz. That's pretty awesome in terms of its overall kind of feature set. So that's a really cool feature and function that we have. And again, if you want to learn a little bit more about that, we've got a very cool video that breaks that down to you on our YouTube channel. So let me go ahead and actually bring up the comparison specification charts for these chipsets, so you can get a little bit of a kind of better idea in terms of how the chipsets differ a bit, and we'll kind of talk about that too. So give me 1 second here, and I will also make sure that we take a look here at anybody's questions if they have anything. So let's go ahead and bring in this little slide for you guys and take a look here. Okay, so if we take a look here, this is the 600 series based chipset. You can see that we've got Z690, we've got H670, B660, and then H610, right? And we'll see right here that when I was referring to when it comes to overclocking support, this is where, of course, there's going to be a big difference. With Z690, you're going to have motherboards that have full support. Even the most entry-level Z690 series motherboards will support overclocking in the CPU, along with BCL-based overclocking. So that is not an option on H670, B660, or H610. Even though H670 and B660, we have very high quality power delivery designs, very good thermal solutions in there. Like I said, there'll be some options for performance tuning the power limits, but no specific overclocking in relation to the frequencies, okay? And from the memory standpoint, as I noted, it is an unlocked memory divider for B660 and H670. So effectively, you're getting about the same DDR overclocking experience between the H and B series motherboards as you would on the Z series. Some of our higher end Z series motherboards may have like a little bit more fine-tuned kind of topology and designs, which may be a little bit more important for those that are kind of really interested in kind of fine-tuning DRAM overclocking. But again, you know, when we're talking about the H and the B series, this is a little bit more targeted towards users that have a lower price point in mind when it comes to the total budget of their system. All right. We can see that the memory channel support, still dual channel memory configurations. This is also an important differentiation right here, the DMI link. So if I bring up another image here, let me see if I can bring this up here. This is going to be an important one. Let me see if I can bring up this table. So give me 1 second here. If I can find this file here. Okay, yep, I've got it right here. And give me 1 second. Okay, so what we want to essentially show here is going to be that when we take a look at the actual chipset itself, here's an example of the H670 based chipset, right? You'll see right here that there's what's called the DMI link. This is essentially the connection that exists between the CPU and the chipset. So one of the cool things that Intel has done here is upgrade this to what's called PCI Gen 4. So it's a DMI 4.0 link now. So this means that there's more bandwidth. But there is going to be a fundamental difference when you're actually taking a look at between H670 and you're taking a look at B660. So this is a little bit of a difference. For most users, this isn't going to, I think, present too much of a differential in terms of your core experience. But if you're looking to kind of leverage a lot of maybe sustained M.2 storage configurations or kind of things along those lines, this could be where there could kind of be something that you would want to keep in mind. So we'll actually show this a little bit more here. So give me 1 second here. And I will show you actually back that slide that we were looking at originally. And we'll do this little compare and contrast again here so you can kind of get that full idea. So so when we're taking a look here at that chipset lane, right, you can see that we've got DMI 4.0 for Z690, DMI 4.0 for H670, and also still DMI 4.0 for B660, but you have essentially half, right? And like I said, this is not going to be too much of a difference for users, but if you're going to have like multiple M.2 based drives, then this could be a factor in terms of just how things get split up. And you can see that right here in terms of the number of PCI lanes that are available for the different types of devices that you may run on the motherboard. There's a little bit of a difference, right? So you got up to 12 lanes on Z690, H670, and then B660. I still think that for the vast majority of users, B660 is going to be more than enough. Even if you're kind of be running two M.2 SSDs and then maybe have some traditional SATA-based drives and then your discrete GPU, for the vast majority of users, B660 I think is the best choice. But if you're really somebody that's maybe looking for a little bit more expansion support, but you don't want to necessarily jump all the way up to Z690, that's where H670 may make a little bit more sense. You'll also see that there's a little bit of difference in terms of the maximum SATA configuration, although keep in mind that these numbers are up to. We don't generally have motherboards that feature this many SATA ports, as we're focusing on enabling more M.2 based connectivity on our motherboards. So you do want to take a look at the boards there. Some exciting points, though, are going to be here that even the kind of the faster USB that is now being pushed forward in terms of these newer chipsets is going to be consistently present there. So you'll see that even here on B660, you still get support for USB 3.Gen 2 by 2, which is up to 20 gigabits. That's pretty exciting. Now, this might not necessarily be on the internal header that's on the motherboard, and so I will kind of dive into this a little bit more in a second here. Sorry, I jumped ahead there in terms of the cooler designation. But when we're talking about actually the high-speed USB connections, there is a difference between the speed of the connection that's going to be here for this front port and then the speed that you might have on the USB-C port that might be on the rear of the motherboard. For most users, again, this isn't going to be too much of an issue because the reality is that most of the time when you're talking about high-speed USB-based devices, most users only have devices that are up to 5 gigabits, not 10 gigabits or even 20 gigabits. But that is just something to kind of be mindful of it. As you maybe go to higher end motherboards, you might find that, let's say, the front USB would support up to like 20 gigabits along with the rear, which could also support 20 gigabits. And you might also have maybe more 10 gigabit space USB. And so this is kind of one of the differences, especially when you start to look at higher motherboards, that even though the spec looks fairly similar, as you go to a higher end board, it's not just the specs, which might be the quote unquote same, but you're generally getting more of that specification along, of course, with much more features and functions that will exist on those boards. So let's finish just rounding out the last points right here in terms of kind of the comparison between the Z, H, and B series chipsets. So we've got our USB ports that we talked about, rapid storage technology. For those of you who are not aware, essentially this is just the ability to have an optimized level of performance for M.2 or SATA-based SSDs. It requires the installation of a driver and can provide better actually power efficiency and actually better responsiveness and better performance. It is something that you do have to enable and then install a corresponding driver. This also does link into RAID support functionality if you're somebody that is going to be interested in RAID. But you will see right here that if you're looking for RAID, that is also where there's a difference between B series chipsets and H series chipsets. Although generally, I do not advocate RAID for most general users. Okay, and of course, all of these chipsets will support PCIe based SSDs. So if you're going to be, taking advantage of a PCIe, NVMe, M.2 SSD, no worries. Every single one of the motherboards will fully support these. And you can also see that the chipset does have native kind of support there for Wi-Fi. That is still dependent on the motherboard manufacturer implementing support. But the vast majority of boards that we're going to be talking about all are coming with great connectivity, whether it's going to be USB with high-speed USB, high-speed Wi-Fi like Wi-Fi 6, and then, of course, high-speed even networking with things like 2.5 gigabit LAN. So that gives us an overall kind of breakdown when it comes to the differences between Z, H, and B series chipsets. Again, kind of the main differences are going to be here, that DMI link between H670, B660, the overclocking support, which is non-existent for the CPU on H and B series versus Z series. You still get to overclock memory on any one of the chipsets. And there's also going to be a little bit of a difference in terms of the PCI lane configurations that you're going to have between these two chipsets. So that overall is really going to cover most of the key differences from a chipset level. There's definitely going to be a lot of other differences on the board level side. And that's what we're going to be talking about here in a little bit. The last thing I do want to touch on is that one of the other things that Intel has worked on that is going to be new for this platform is going to be the introduction of higher performing coolers that they're going to have for the actual non-K series CPUs. So you'll see right here that for the highest end model, so the Core i9, it will come with the RH1 cooler. And then for kind of the majority of the other models that you'll see, Core i7, Core i5, and Core i3, you're going to have this RM1. And the cool thing that I do like about the RM1 is that the RH1, while it's going to offer better performance, it does kind of utilize a more kind of advanced kind of backplate integration that you would have with you install something like an AIO cooler. I like the push pin based design. It's very simple, very easy for builders. A lot of people will overspend on coolers that they don't necessarily need. This is a nice, easy, and effective design. So it's nice to see Intel is offering an improved cooling solution here that is simple and easy to install. Although Do keep in mind that when we talk again about the the ASUS APE feature that will be in our motherboards that helps to extend the power limits, this is where it could actually be beneficial for you to bypass using the in-box cooler and actually put a higher performing cooler because the system will actually produce more heat, consume more power, so you would want a better quality cooling solution. And that's only, again, if you're going to be using the APE function. And then the most basic cooler will be the RS1, which will, of course, come with the most entry base CPUs, the Pentium or the Celeron base CPUs. Okay, so I think that covers us there in terms of key differences. Let me see if we got any questions there that might have come up. So Sunday Superfly is asking actually about temperatures. So, one interesting thing here, I don't want to detract too much from the focus of our stream, but what I can tell you is that a lot of people, when they do temperature analysis, they really are not actually being practical or sensible. They're taking a lot of conjecture or kind of analysis that might be presented by some media or by some users in the community. But it's important to kind of understand, I think, a few things when you're measuring temperatures. One is that there's a big difference between synthetic stress test temperature performance and then general real world application temperature performance. We actually do dive into this and talk about this in the overclocking guide video that we have that's also on our YouTube channel. But take for example is that you could have an overclocked 12900K, and you could run that on a just 240 millimeter AIO, and a lot of people think that's not enough. And the actual cooling performance is more than sufficient when you're talking about general gaming. But if all of a sudden you put in an all-core workload under some synthetic benchmark or stress test, you're going to have very, very high temperatures that are going to be much more difficult to manage. The question, though, is that are you actually doing that on your system? So it's not really, in my opinion, a valid barometer to kind of benchmark your system in a scenario that never exists. The only people that should be accounting for that type of thermal load are users that maybe are more professionally kind of minded or prosumer minded. So, they're actually actively doing 3D rendering, science and simulation, they're doing advanced, coding work that's consistently rendering across the CPU or encoding across the CPU, kind of scenarios that aren't, like I said, for the vast majority of users. And when we talk about temperature differences in these scenarios, we're talking about significant temperature differences. You could literally see the temperatures be 30, 40 degrees difference between a normal kind of just running your games, running general applications, and then a synthetic stress test. So it's very, very different. The other kind of couple points that I'll give is that when you're talking about temperatures, you have to be very clear. People sometimes will just say, this is my temperature. But when you talk about a CPU that has, potentially 16 threads, you could have temperature difference between the hottest core and the coldest core. Are you talking about the package temperature, right? Which are you talking about? So you have to be very clear. Are you talking about an average temperature across all of them after 15 or 30 minutes? Having like an ambiguous value doesn't really add a lot of information for users to try to give a little bit more insight if you're asking the community for that information. We've got some really good information in the PC DIY group that helps you I've covered this a lot in that group. So I would recommend that if you've got more questions, check out the group. And take a look at some of the posts where I've responded there and given some insight regarding that. But hopefully that helps you out there. Okay. Let me just see. Will there be a mini ITX? Yes, we will have mini ITX, so don't worry. We'll definitely be showing off mini ITX. We've got a really awesome ROG STRIX B660-I ITX motherboard, which I think is going to be a fantastic option for those of you that are looking for something that is a little bit lower in price point, but still very good in terms of the overall core specifications for small form factor builds. And also maybe it carries a little bit of benefit depending on some of the restrictions that you might have in a tighter closure, because it doesn't necessarily have some of the Z height considerations that our higher end Z690 board does, because of a difference in the triple decker design that it has for its M.2 base SSDs versus the traditional configuration that we have on that Dash I board. Okay, so let me just see if there's any other questions there. Hey, Peppy2K Gaming, happy to have you here. So let's go ahead and keep moving this along here. Again, if anybody's got any other questions, we'll keep moving this along here. All right, so let's go ahead and now get into the next portion here. So again, we've talked about, of course, the new CPUs that we've got here, the range of the CPUs that are available. We have also gone ahead and detailed the differences between the B and H and Z series chipsets. We talked about overclocking support. And so now I think we want to go ahead and actually jump into some of the motherboards. So I think the first motherboard series that we want to go ahead and take a look at is going to be with the ROG STRIX series that we're going to have, which is going to be under the B660 based chipset. And so I think this is going to be a pretty awesome board here for a lot of you that are going to be interested in having a gaming centric board that's got a strong set of features and functions here. So let's go ahead and get ready to take a look here at what we've got from the ROG STRIX lineup with B660 based motherboards. It's important to note that when we talk about, there will be no H670 boards that we're going to have for the ROG STRIX lineup. So these are all B660 based motherboards. And specifically, we're going to have two models that we're going to be focusing in on that we're going to have in North America. So that's going to be for US and for Canada. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look here. So this is the lineup right here. As you can see, it's a really cool eclectic lineup. Some of these boards are not going to be available in the North American region. The ones that we're going to be focusing on is going to be talking about the B660-A, and then we're also going to be taking a look at this guy, which is going to be the Dash I. So we're going to have an ATX-based SKU, and we're going to have a mini ITX-based SKU for you, okay? So I do want to also go ahead and talk a little bit about here the naming rule convention, where some people have questions like, how does the naming rules kind of work? So the first part of the name is pretty simple. That's just the designation of which series it is. ASUS has quite a number of series. We have our Prime series, we have our ProArt series, we have ROG, we have ROG STRIX, and we have TUF Gaming, right? And I believe, if I didn't say ProArt, right? So it's actually a total of 5 different series that we have available. The ROG STRIX really kind of represents our kind of mainstream and mainstream kind of sweet spot for a lot of gamers. Now, keep in mind that the Z690 will still be a bit higher end, of course, in terms of its overall features, functions, and specifications than the ROG STRIX models that we're going to have within the B series based chipset, but these are still quite feature rich. So ROG STRIX chipset designation, the number that right here is the positioning number, and the numbers are pretty easy to understand. That usually, if it's a G, that would mean micro ATX, I would be mini ITX, and then anything else would be an ATX based motherboard. The only ones that we're going to be talking about here today are going to be the A and the I. Then you have gaming, then we have Wi-Fi. To note that the motherboard comes with Wi-Fi. And lastly, if you remember, I talked about if it has D4 in the designation, that means it is a DDR4 based motherboard. Okay. So the models that we're going to be talking about here, we have the ROG STRIX B660-A D4. So this is going to be a DDR4 based motherboard. And then we've got the ROG STRIX B660-I, which you'll see this is not a DDR5, excuse me, DDR4, because there's no D4. This is still a DDR5 based motherboard. Okay, here you can see a closer look. Really, really nice motherboard in terms of its overall kind of design aesthetic. It's pretty much almost the same in terms of kind of this board that I've got right here, which will show you a little bit of a closer look up when we go ahead and move away from some of the detailing that I'm talking about here on the motherboard. So when we first kind of want to talk about some kind of key aspects, of course, like I said, it's the 1700 socket that we've got on the motherboard right here. We're utilizing power stages for all the power componentry here for the VRM. That essentially is just, they're more efficient components, so they have essentially better thermal efficiency, higher performance ratings, and to be frank, they're literally a lot more than the power rating requirement that is going to exist for any of the CPUs. So whether you want to put a, a 12400 in here, or you want to put a 12900, you can feel confident and comfortable that the power delivery is not going to be the limiting factor. That also equally goes for the actual thermal solution. These are very high performance, large, robust thermal heat sinks. So they're going to help to make sure to keep the VRM nice and cool and reliable. Again, whether you're gaming, whether you're under full load, it doesn't matter. You're not going to have to worry about thermal issues. You've got DDR4 support right here. So 4 DIMMs, as you can see right here, the memory support is quite high, but for most users, they're probably only going to be running, like I said, 3600 to about 4000, maybe 4400 megahertz memory. You can also see right here that you've got robust M.2 expansion slots. So you can see you got 3 M.2 SSDs that are supported right here. Those are all PCI Gen 4, but there is a little bit of difference in the speed. You'll see right here that 2 of them can support PCI Gen 4 by 4. another PCI Gen 4 by 4, and then one that which is going to be limited to PCI Gen 4 but by 2. And somebody might ask, well, does that really matter? No, it does not matter. The reality is that in just about kind of almost every situation, you're not really going to have to be concerned with the overall difference between kind of by 4 and by 2 when you talk about general applications, game loading, patching, installation of applications. The overall experience actually between the two, even with a drive that could support faster speeds, is going to still be almost identical. The only time that you would really generally see probably a large difference is if you benchmark them. So if you ran, a benchmark for an SSD, then of course you'll see the difference. But when we talk about real world use, it's not going to be really a noticeable difference. Okay, so expansion slots, you'll also see that these boards do fully give you support to have support for PCI Gen 5. So this is one of the really exciting technologies that 12th gen series CPUs are introducing, is that optionally you may have DDR4, you may have DDR5, but you also are going to get PCI Gen 5 support. This is a difference though, is that with Z690, some Z690 motherboards essentially will give you PCI Gen 5 for the M.2 based SSDs, whereas you can see right here, all of these are limited to a maximum of PCI Gen 4. But this is really, really, really fast. So again, it's not a critical factor, but if you really want the absolute best, then that's why you would want to go with Z690 and look at a motherboard that has PCI Gen 5 for M.2. But you do have PCI Gen 5 support for the next generation of graphics cards in the future as they become available, so you're good to go. And then you can see you've got traditional expansion slots for other things you might want to add in, like a capture card, sound card, any number of different types of add-in cards, right? We can see right here angled. We'll take a little bit of a closer look with the board a little bit in a secondary camera shot and do some other images, but here's just a different angle. The boards all do feature the AIO pump header, which is really nice to be able to easily connect your AIO coolers like our ROG STRIX LC series. They're very simple and easy, so you don't have a controller that's required. Just run the pump straight to the motherboard. The motherboard will automatically power the pump, and then just connect your fan straight to the motherboard and you're good to go. You can see that we talked about those, of course, M.2 heatsinks, chipset heatsink. You can see that internal Type-C connector, your SATA ports right there, the M.2 based SSDs are supported right there. And then we've also got 4 RGB headers that are on here. So there's ARGB headers and there's one legacy standard RGB header. And these do support what's called multiplexing. So if you want to put like a splitter on them so that you could have like 3, 4, 5 devices but connected to one header, that is possible. So even though you only have 4, you could easily have one motherboard that could have like 10 RGB fans all running from one motherboard. So that is possible. Okay. This board will have RGB lighting in terms of the IO zone right here. We talked about the RGB headers right here. These are all fully controllable, of course, within the ASUS Aura utility portion of the Armored Crate software, which is our kind of new fully integrated utility for the motherboards, which now not only does RGB lighting, but also gives you advanced fan controls, system monitoring, access to other features and functions, and even updates to, let's say, like things like drivers and other applications. Now, this is a pretty big one right here. Is going to be the audio design. This is a really big upgrade compared to kind of prior boards in the past. So this is using pretty much the latest ALC 4080 audio codec. So this is a really nice audio codec, and this is going to be an upgrade compared to the TUF Gaming motherboards, the ProArt motherboards, the Prime motherboards, any of the other motherboards in the B and H series segment. The best audio will be on the ROG boards. So if you care a little bit more about having kind of better tonality, better detail, better sound stage, this is going to be a really nice plus point that you have available to here. There's also a dedicated Savitech amp that's built on board. This is, of course, a fully isolated audio design, and there's a really rich audio suite that we also have in there. But I'll dive into that a little bit. Let me go ahead and actually just stop this portion right here and take a closer look at the board in a moment. And I'm also going to just double check and see if anybody's got any questions right here. So let me see if anything's come up there. Hey, Norman. Thanks for joining us from Bermuda. Fantastic to have you here. Hey, Constantine. Yeah, so that's a good question. With AC in place, is there any reason to use AI Suite? So actually, you'll find that on generally the newer boards that we have available, they generally They may still have AI Suite, and there's still maybe some certain kind of level of like voltage tuning parameters. This is going to be more common on kind of the Z series motherboards, but pretty much for most users, there's no reason to install AI Suite. The main kind of holdover in the past was fan tuning control parameters, but since fan tuning has now also been integrated within Armoury Crate for all of our current generation motherboards on 12th gen series platforms, so B660, H670, and Z690, for the vast majority of users, kind of now Armoury Crate is your one-stop shop. It will offer hardware level monitoring. It will offer enabling options for overclocking on Z690. You also, of course, have much more advanced options for things like system profiling options with your lighting and your fan controls, the integrated driver monitoring, and a lot of other functions. So for most users, there's not any requirement to install AI Suite. Okay. All right, so let me go ahead and show you guys the board right here. So this is actually going to be the Z690 version right here, but and we'll talk about against actually the newer version of this one that we have that has DDR5 in a little bit. But I just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of perspective of kind of the similar aesthetic in terms of kind of this a little bit more of a white focus theme. These Dash A models are really popular for those of you that are looking to build systems that are more kind of in that white theme or brighter or bolder type of colors theme. So they're really, really popular in that regard. And you can see that they got a really nice design aesthetic. Now, again, this is the Z690 based version as opposed to the B660 version, but I wanted to just kind of give you a little bit of a closer look. And I also wanted to give a little bit of a closer shot right here, specifically to the audio design. So give me 1 second here. I'm going to lay this board down, see if I can get this right here. So, and allow you guys to see. Yeah, there we go. All right, and I just want to show a little bit of a closer shot right here. So this is right here, the Supreme Effects audio design, and you'll actually see that there's a full isolation audio path. So all the motherboards we're going to be talking about do feature this high quality isolation audio path. So that means that actually they're separated in terms of the PCB design from the rest of the motherboard. It helps to overall improve the performance of the codec. You can see that they're shielded right here. You got audio grade capacitors, and as I noted, you also have that nice amplifier. And the software suite is also going to be a really big distinguishing point on these motherboards, where when we take a look at a board like the ROG STRIX series, they are going to come with a far more advanced kind of software suite within Sonic Studio. And somebody might ask, like, well, what's the value essentially of using that software suite? And I would say that it really comes down to kind of what is your preference in terms of how you kind of might tweak or tune or kind of configure different aspects when it comes to your motherboard and your kind of sound experience. So if you're somebody that likes to kind of be able to kind of tweak, the EQ, you want to be able to kind of prioritize, for maybe having a little bit better tonality, better pickup, and let's say like a first-person shooter game versus kind of tuning it for a different audio experience when you're listening to, streaming audio or watching videos online. That's a really great thing with Sonic Studios. You can actually have customized profiles per application so that you can easily kind of toggle back and forth between that. That is just one of the examples of like where the software suite allows for a lot more granularity and control. A lot of people will kind of just like bypass that and not even think about that. But I will say that users that do spend the time in it, they actually can find it quite useful. So this is going to be, definitely one of the differences that we're talking about here. Okay. You can also see right there that it does come included with DTS sound unbound, which is going to be nice for kind of like a virtual surround-based processing, although we do have virtual surround support within Sonic Studio, and then two-way AI noise canceling support. The two-way AI noise canceling support is pretty cool because, of course, it works not only in your incoming audio, but also in your outgoing audio. So when we take a look here in the I/O, you can see that you've got a lot of I/O connectivity. You've got DisplayPort, you got HDMI. The HDMI is HDMI 2.1, so it is going to support higher resolutions and higher refresh rates. And if you don't have access to a GPU, which right now there is kind of a challenge in terms of being able to sometimes get a discrete GPU in terms of the marketplace, we have some users that really like the benefit of taking advantage of the integrated iGPU for a basic setup perspective until they can get their discrete GPU in place. You've got your integrated IO shield, which just makes the installation experience a lot easier, right? You don't have to worry about setting anything up or forgetting anything. You literally just slide the motherboard straight in and you're good to go. So it makes the installation experience a lot more straightforward. USB BIOS flashback button, which is great. It means you don't have to have any CPU. You don't have to have memory. You don't even have to have graphics card. You literally just connect the power supply, connect a flash drive. You press that button and it can low level update the UEFI if you want to do things that way. You've got your, of course, your high speed 10 gigabits USB Type-C port, another 10 gigabit Type-A port, 2.5 gigabit LAN, which is fantastic. And you can, of course, pair that with any of our high speed 2.5 gigabit enabled ASUS routers. You then have your USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, Type-A. And then you've also got Wi-Fi 6, which if you guys are not running Wi-Fi 6 and you've got a Wi-Fi 6 router, Wi-Fi 6 really is an outstanding experience. You can literally have in the real world, 300, 400, 500, megabits. You can literally actually even wirelessly, be getting, 4 to 6 times the speed of a 10100 Ethernet cable and the same class of latency performance. So you really don't have to kind of be worried about that if you haven't kind of made the shift over to wireless and you're kind of been focused on hardline connectivity, you can really get a great experience. But ideally, you of course do want to match a Wi-Fi 6 based motherboard with a Wi-Fi 6 router to fully get the best experience. You then got one more Type-C port down here, and then you've got your multi-channel audio output. One thing that you'll also see right there is that you got a Thunderbolt header. This is pretty cool. Most of the motherboards here will support actually our Thunderbolt 4 add-in card. So if you did want to add Thunderbolt to the motherboard, you could do that, but keep in mind that is a separate purchase and a specific card that has to be purchased and connected to that header and installed in the slot so that you can take advantage of that. Hey, we do actually, for the price, we'll make sure to update that. I believe Juno's been giving the updates in terms of pricing information here within the kind of the comment section. And I have already linked in the chat actually a breakdown for our website, which actually has all the motherboards listed. But I'll probably make sure to include that final information, the link in the description at the very end. And I will give confirmation on the pricing as I kind of go through each one of the respective models that we're going through here. So no worries on that side. For this respective model, if you're wondering, the B660-A, this will have an MSRP of $239. Okay. So the next model here that we're going to take a look at is going to be the ROG STRIX B660-I motherboard. This is going to be a mini ITX-based motherboard as opposed to a full ATX-based board. It's got that really clean, cool, Cybertex and, of course, edgier type design that we have on ROG STRIX products. You still have an internal Type-C header. You've got 4 SATA ports. You've got your dual M.2 based configuration, really robust heatsink design that's on this motherboard, right? It's really still quite packed in terms of kind of all the features. And this is going to be a DDR5 based motherboard, not a DDR4 based motherboard. So that is important to keep in mind. So these are all still going to also be power stages. So very high performant, very efficient, high quality heat sinks to be able to keep the system cool and reliable under load, even in a compact system that you're going to have when you're talking about a mini ITX build. So this is great to know that you can feel confident, even if you take advantage of those features like we talked about with the ASUS 8 mode to be able to unlock the performance for your non-K parts and having a higher power limit. That is going to be a really nice benefit of having the power stages and also having the large, robust VRM heatsinks. You've got the, of course, like I noted, DDR5 support, your internal USB-C connector, your front USB 3 connector, your 4 SATA ports. You've got 2 M.2 based SSD support here that's on this model, and you'll see that both of those are PCI Gen 4x4. So this is an improvement compared to some of the other motherboards in the past, where maybe one was like PCI Gen 4 and one was PCI Gen 3. So both of these are going to be PCI Gen 4. And then your PCIe slot will fully support PCI Gen 5. So, of course, for the next generation of graphics cards. And, of course, this is fully backwards compatible with PCI Gen 4 and PCI Gen 3. Okay. We can take a look here. You can see those really large, robust VRM heatsinks like I talked about. Very, very high performing, very efficient in terms of giving you, like I said, a great thermal experience under load. This is the chipset implementation right here. And also, of course, where you would be accessing your M.2 based SSDs. You will still also have Aura RGB lighting. Now, on a mini ITX system, most of them traditionally don't usually have a lot of visibility. A lot of the chassis really kind of restrict the view of the components, but maybe if you're going with an open frame system, or if you got one that has maybe like an accessible side profile and you can see a little bit more of the system, you still do have some RGB lighting flexibility that is available to you. So you still have one ARGB header that's available to you and one traditional header. And again, as I talked about earlier, the headers do support multiplexing, so you can put a splitter on those headers so that if you want to have multiple devices connected to one header, then you can do that. And again, all the RGB lighting control is controlled within the ASUS Armory Crate software. And here for the audio, we take the audio design, and it's a little bit different. It's using the same audio codec that we had previously on our ROG series motherboards, the S1220A, which is still a very high quality, high performing audio codec. You still have a discrete isolated audio design, and you also have that SavvyTech audio amp, and we still have that same rich audio suite. So still very good quality audio design for a mini ITX based setup. So you don't have to kind of worry about having to have like a discrete DAC or something like that. But of course, that's always based on your preference when you're talking about putting together a system. For all your audio connectivity and your kind of USB connections and display output, you can see the board's got tons of connections. You got HDMI, DisplayPort. You got 3 USB 2 here. You then have your 2.5 gigabit LAN on here, Intel-based LAN. These are all utilizing the latest revision, so you don't have to have any concerns in that regard. You got your Type A based connections, and then you have 20 gigabit USB Type-C, so very, very high speed. Wi-Fi 6, and then you also have your USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type-C port also here, and then multi-channel audio down there. Yeah, so hey Eve, is pricing, any of the pricing that we mentioned, you should generally see most of these pricings adhere to MSRP. Generally, you don't see too many issues with motherboards usually having elevated or non kind of MSRP pricing. As always, what we do recommend if you want to try to adhere to the kind of target MSRPs that ASUS defines for their products is purchasing from direct kind of first party e-tailers. So an example is if you're purchasing from Amazon or from Newegg, for instance, you would want to purchase directly from Newegg or directly from Amazon and not necessarily a third party seller who may not be adhering to the MSRP values for the motherboards. Okay. Hey, Victor, this focus is all about the latest generation of Intel 12th Gen series motherboards that are, Intel 12th Gen series motherboards for B, H, and Z series based chipsets. So we don't have any information to talk about for AMD, but if you join our PC DIY group, as soon as we have information to talk about, we will let you know. But if you're interested in finding about the most recent series of motherboards, we do have recent live streams that we have gone deep dive into the latest generation of X570 refreshes, B550 series, and even B450 refresh series motherboards. So it doesn't matter whether you're talking about Intel or AMD, ASUS has got you covered. All right, so let's lastly go ahead and just take a quick look here and compare B560 versus B660 and kind of the upgrades, improvements that we have right here. So that 30Z10 Aries, the B660-H will not be carried in North America. So if you're looking for that model on the ASUS US-based website, you will not find it there. As I noted here, the models that I'm talking about are the models that we will have available in North America. So the ROG STRIX B660-A and the ROG STRIX B660-I are going to be the ROG STRIX SKUs that we will have available in North America. Okay. So let's quickly just take a look here, right? The prior generation was DDR4. The new generation right here, you'll see that there's the B660 versions that we have available, but we are only going to have the ROG Strix DDR4 version, not the DDR5 version. Okay, so again, this will be this model, the ROG Strix B660 -A Gaming Wi-Fi D4. Okay, improved power architecture, right? So we just have essentially more power stages on here. We have a more robust VRM heatsink design. We have PCI Gen 5 support, more M.2 SSDs that can be supported, 3 versus 2. We moved over to an Intel LAN based solution, more ARGB headers, so a total of 4 RGB headers as opposed to in the past you had 4, but there was only 2 ARGB. HDMI 2.1 along with DisplayPort, and then the latest generation ALC 4080 audio codec. So some nice upgrades in that regard. Okay. And then when we take a look at the -I model, we can see again upgraded power delivery, DDR5 versus of course DDR4 support, PCI Gen 5, dual PCI Gen 4x4 for the M.2 based SSDs, where the prior model had dual M.2 based SSDs that were still PCIe, but one was Gen 4 and one was Gen 3. Again, move over to 2.5 Intel gigabit LAN, and then HDMI 2.1 as opposed to 2.0. So that is going to kind of recap that. Now, some other just kind of things you might not realize is that the power connectors that we have on these boards are upgraded power connectors. They have essentially thicker pins, which help to provide better current handling, better thermal efficiency. So this is just going to be overall beneficial in terms of giving you better operating performance. So that is something that we have. It's called our ProCool power connectors. And you can actually see right here that those pins, if you look closely, you'll find that they're thicker than standard-based power connectors. And so if you see that information on our website, that's what the ProCool power connection means. The AMP technology, again, like I noted, guys, we have a great video that's on our YouTube channel where you can actually see me walk through exactly how AMP works, where you can essentially install some memory on your system that might be a much more conservative DDR5 frequency, like let's say 4800 megahertz. But then through specialized profiles, we can give you two options to either have tighter timings for that same memory kit or much higher frequency. And you don't have to have any kind of experience or understanding in terms of kind of tuning your memory. So that's a really great feature on DDR5. For DDR4 based motherboards, we continue to offer the same class of very high quality interoperability and compatibility for XMP based memory that you would come to expect from ASUS. For your fan connectivity and headers, you got all the kind of connectors that you could really ask for. These are fully controllable in terms of within the UEFI or within the operating system. So you can control the fans within the UEFI, or you can do it in the OS via Armory Crate. You can see you've got your CPU fan header, your CPU optional header, chassis fan headers, and the AIO pump header. Those are all on the motherboard. And again, also for users that might just be running a lot of fans, keep in mind you can run splitters on these fan headers. So if you want to run 2, 3, 4 fans from one fan header, that is entirely possible. Okay. And you can still see even on the mini ITX board, you still get good level of connectivity with the CPU fan, chassis fan, and the AIO pump header. Commonly in these type of situations, we do usually see that there's users that are going to run like a splitter cable to the chassis fan to maybe have 2 or 3 fans. Most mini ITX chassis usually don't have more than 3 to 4 fans unless it's like a much larger chassis. So the more limited number of headers kind of aligns with the smaller, more compact nature of a mini ITX chassis. PCI Gen 5, most of you are generally aware that really the big benefit is, of course, going to be increase in bandwidth, but it's not a critical aspect to kind of be concerned with if you're, of course, running hardware that is older or using a lower PCIe link. As I noted, they are fully backwards compatible with PCI Gen 4 and PCI Gen 3. All right. And some cool updates that we've got within Armory Crate now gives you the ability to actually access your M.2 information inside of the actual Armory Crate utility, which is great if you're running an M.2 SSD, which does not come with its own utility. Wi-Fi 6 support, the 2.5 gigabit LAN support, the front USB 3.2 header, which is on those models, which is great for the newer chassis that have this type of connectivity option. And just some nice kind of installation points, right, where we have the single-sided latch design. This makes things easier, more accessible when you're actually installing your memory, especially once you actually have a graphics card installed. The M.2 Q latch, I will show you guys that here, a quick demo in a moment, actually how this works, but essentially just makes the installation process much simpler, much easier for installing your M.2 based SSDs. We talked about already the Supreme Effects audio design, but you can here see the actual UI interface of what I talked about, where you can go ahead and have, like I said, audio profiles set up for different applications. So if you want to have, like I said, specific parameters set for, let's say, like a game versus your web browser, then you can do that. And that's the really nice thing with Sonic Studio, is being able to kind of define those audio parameters. That's the AI noise canceling feature, which can be easily accessed and enabled within the Armory Crate software. On these boards, you will also have our AI networking technology. And pretty much what this is that it's an intelligent way for the system to automatically realize whatever type of connected experience you're running on your system. So if you open up a game, as opposed to open up your web browser, we automatically actually know what is actively running in the forefront, and we can optimize the packets to actually have a better experience. This can be beneficial if, let's say, you're opening up, let's say, Apex Legends or Fortnite or, a Valorant or, Warzone, but you've got your web browser, maybe streaming application, other things running in the background, and you don't want essentially those applications affecting your gaming performance. Then the great thing is that with AI networking, it will automatically, through the game first application, essentially prioritize your gaming so that you get a better, more responsive experience. There's a lot of other really cool things that are part of the game first suite as well. So we're not going to talk about all of them, but it does give you a lot of really advanced information, which can be quite useful in terms of kind of fine tuning and maximizing your networking experience. We talked about the RGB headers and connectivity experience. And within the UEFI environment, of course, many of you are aware that we've got a great UEFI experience. And we've also got a really great video that we do have on our YouTube channel, which will dive into the UEFI environment. So that pretty much wraps up the boards that we want to talk about there from the ROG STRIX lineup. So we're going to get ready here to go to our next boards, but I do want to go ahead and make sure that we don't have any questions right there. So give me 1 second here, and I will double check and make sure that we don't have any questions there before we get to the next board here. And again, I will go ahead and just show you Lastly, here is a general recap. We will confirm the pricing that we talked about. So the ROG STRIX B660-A Gaming Wi-Fi D4, so that means the DDR4 version is going to be coming in at $239. So let's go ahead and just again show you that board here. This is what we first looked at. So that is going to be coming in at $239 DDR4 based motherboard. And let's go ahead and recap the mini ITX based board, which is going to be the ROG STRIX B660-I, right? And this one will be a DDR5 based motherboard. And this one will be coming in at $219. So there is our mini ITX. So those are the two motherboards that we're going to have for the ROG STRIX lineup for the kind of BH series designation. Okay, guys? So let me go ahead and just see if we got any questions here. Hey, Zach, you've already asked actually about the Spot the X in the community. So I've already answered that a few times. So, you know, you can go ahead and reference my feedback to you in the PC DIY group regarding actually availability for the Spot the X. So stay tuned for that. Hey, as far as the compatibility, I think that you'll actually have a bit better compatibility for a broader set of coolers because the kind of key difference, if we actually go back to the Dash I board right here, you'll actually find that when you kind of take a look right here, one of the big differences is that the motherboard does not have the triple decker design, which essentially would create a little bit more obstruction. So you essentially have more space. This is also a lower profile of VRM heatsink as opposed to on the Dash I, which is taller. But I can tell you that we worked with partners like Noctua to actually update their compatibility matrix to account for some information that was originally listed, which wasn't accurate. So I don't really think it's that much of a concern, but I would say that you are going to have a broader set of coolers that would work on this version of the Dash I than you would have on the Z690-I. And that's, like I said, specifically due to the lower Z height of this VRM heatsink and the M.2 based heatsink portion over here. So yes, you know, if you're looking for those larger tower type heatsink based units or downward firing tower heatsink based units, or even some AIOs, which have different kind of pump housings and where the actual cables might kind of be going out to, you're going to have a bit more flexibility on this board than you would have on the Z690-I. So hopefully that answers your question there. Let me see right here. Hey, Hexagon, we actually have answered this in our PC DIY Facebook group. So if you're actually part of the group, you would actually know latest information, but we will be probably coming out with the Thor, the first model a little bit later, probably this month, hopefully with the 1000 watt. And then as we work to the very end of Q1, moving into Q2, you'll see the other model kind of release with the very last model, probably in early Q2 being the 850 watt. But first, it'll be the 1000 watt, then the 1200 watt, and then the 1600 watt, and then last would be the 850 watt. Okay, so I think hopefully we've got every question right there. Hey, Failing Soldier, I did also go ahead and respond to some of those questions right there regarding another user that had actually information, had some questions regarding the kind of interoperability and compatibility with certain types of air coolers. So again, if you're kind of running maybe something like a larger, like a Noctua, like D15 or something like that, you could run that on there and you shouldn't really be concerned. So I think you'd be all right. Like I said, you will be able to see an updated product matrix from partners on their corresponding compatibility matrix. But because, like I said, that the Z height is going to be lower on the VRM heatsink and the M.2 heatsink area, you shouldn't have any overall concerns, I think, in that regard. Okay, so let's get ready to go to our next motherboard within this lineup here, and we're going to actually talk about our ProArt B660-I board. So give me 1 second here. Okay, so give me 1 second here, guys, and I'm going to go ahead and load up our ProArt series motherboard. We're going to go ahead and take a look at it here. Hey, Mohammed is asking, do these new motherboards support 1200 AIOs? So yes and no. So what I mean would be yes and no is that if we actually take a look quickly at one of our motherboards here, let me go ahead and bring up this image here for, let's say, our creator board. Is that one of the nice features that we actually introduced on the Z690 series is that we had dual mounting holes, right? You'll see that actually on these boards, they don't actually have the dual mounting holes. So you can't natively essentially use a 1200 based AIO cooler. But pretty much all partners that are out there that are producing AIOs, including ASUS, all of our new AIO LC2 series coolers all come with a 1700 bracket inside the box. So you don't have to worry about kind of requesting one. So those coolers were originally designed, pre, of course, 12th gen series CPUs. So they are compatible. So you can take 12th gen series prior generation coolers that were designed for the socket 1200 platform, but utilizing a 1700 bracket on the motherboard, right? But if you do not have that native 1700 bracket, unlike our Z690 series, which have essentially dual mounting holes that are on them, you would not essentially have that ability to easily or potentially kind of use that interim option of using the 1200 mounting hardware. So it is important to keep that in mind. Although we do strongly recommend that you use native 1700 bracket for the best overall contact, due to just some differences in what's called the Z height of the CPU. So the CPU is a little bit different between 12th gen and kind of older 10 or 11th gen series CPUs. And so there's that little bit of difference can sometimes affect a contact of the bottom of the AIO cooler with the CPU. So ideally, you do want to use the native 1700 bracket. Hey, Fabrico, you don't need to worry about in terms of the Z690. All of our newer inventory, once we actually get it in, will essentially have no issues in terms of the production process in place, so you can feel confident. We do also have more information that we've also posted in our PCDIY Facebook group with an announcement that if you have purchased a board, you can easily check the serial number and see if you were affected. Not all actually Maximus series motherboards were affected. It does to a degree actually depend on the region that you are in, but essentially the new production that will be coming in the not too distant future, all those boards will be fine. So whether you want to go with the Hero or you want to get any of the other motherboards that we have, you'll be okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually now take a look here at the creator board. So this is going to be the B660 Creator. It's got that really nice design aesthetic that you would come to expect with our ProArt series, which is kind of refined. It's got those nice gold accents on here. You've got a lot of connectivity and feature set on here. This board will have dual LAN. It's got 3 M.2 based SSDs on here. It has quick charging support for the front USB. So we're going to go through a lot of the really cool features and functions that is on this motherboard and break things down for you. So let me go ahead and get everything loaded up here, and we will jump into this board. So give me 1 second. All right. And this motherboard is going to be a DDR4 based motherboard. Okay, so do keep that in mind, is that when we're talking about this ProArt series based motherboard, it is going to be a DDR4 based motherboard. Hey Zeke, yes, that is correct. B660-A is going to be priced at $239, and that is USD. That is correct. Okay, so let's go ahead and now take a look here at our ProArt series B660 creator board. And again, this is just a quick recap. We know we already talked about this in the very beginning of the stream. If anybody's kind of clicking through, kind of, going back and forth, trying to maybe target on a specific board, just a quick recap of the chipset block for B660. I want to cover this again, remember that you do have a DMI4 link here, but keep in mind and remember that the total number of PCI lanes is going to be a little bit lower on B660 than it is under H670, and there's half the effective bandwidth that's on the DMI4 link for B660 versus H670. Okay, but otherwise it's still very feature rich and is really going to still give you a great experience. So when we talk about really what this board is bringing to the table, got a lot of really rich expansion and connectivity. So you can see right here, we've got HDMI, again, 2.1. We have a DP in, and some people might ask, well, why would you necessarily have DP in? This is due if you're going to essentially be taking advantage of the Thunderbolt add-in card and you essentially want to be able to run the display in and then matrix things out. That's partially because also this board is quite unique in that the actual Type-C port on this supports what's called DP alt mode. So traditionally for most users, when they use a USB-C port on a motherboard, that USB-C port is only designed for data output. So essentially you would connect like an external hard drive, you could connect a mouse, you could connect a number of different peripherals, but you wouldn't generally connect a monitor. But DP alt mode means that that actual port will also support an actual display output configuration. So this does actually give you the ability that you could be running multiple displays. So you could run from like that HDMI, and you could also utilize this Type-C DP alt mode connection. So you do have additional level of kind of connectivity that's on this ProArt board. And part of this is also that in the Creator series, you won't necessarily have as many users that have to use a discrete GPU. Keep in mind that the X architecture, right, the Xe architecture that is on Intel's integrated graphics is actually quite solid and already can offer acceleration and within different types of content creation applications. So like Adobe Creative Cloud, DaVinci Resolve, Luminar, there's actually quite a number of different programs that actually do benefit from acceleration directly from the iGPU. So depending actually on your application, your workload, you might need to not actually run a discrete GPU, but of course, this all depends on what you're doing. If you benefit from a discrete GPU, then of course you would want to use one. But there are some situations where getting that higher performing CPU that you have within that 12th gen part and then just utilizing the iGPU is going to be more insufficient. So it's not a requisite. And this is part of the reason why we offer a little bit more display flexibility on this board than we might have on some of our other motherboards. You got your USB 2 ports. You got USB 3, 1 gigabit LAN right here, then a 2.5 gigabit LAN that's on there. So you have dual LAN, which is nice for redundancy, or maybe you're going to have one for your internet and one for your intranet. So one going out and one being locally connected, maybe to like a NAS or maybe some type of SAN configuration. You then have additional USB high-speed ports, USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A ports, optical output, and multi-channel audio. You can see right here still high-performance dual contact heat sinks. We then have DDR4, very similar right there. 3 M.2 SSDs, 1, 2, and 3. And actually, I forgot to show that. So before I finish going on, let me actually show the actual Q latch design that we have here on the board. So give me 1 second here, and I will show this to you guys. Because I was supposed to show this to you on the ROG STRIX board. So let's just go ahead and take a look right here. So if you take a look right here, you can see that we've got our motherboard. I'm just going to go ahead and remove the screws right here. And one of the nice things that you will actually find is that on our newer motherboards here, the screws are going to be captive. So that means that once you unscrew the actual heatsink, the screws will not fall off. They'll actually stay in place. And of course, you'll have your heatsink right there. You have to have, of course, you have to remove the the protection for the actual thermal pad, and then you would be good to go. But you can see right here, this is actually going to be our Q design feature that we have for M.2 based SSDs, right? So on the Z690 board that we'll talk a little bit later about, it's got this really cool feature called Q release, but it also has this Q latch. And the way that the Q latch design works is essentially right here where you can see I can align my M.2 SSD. So I can go ahead and see this right here. You can see right there, and then you pretty much just have to lock that in place, and you can see you've locked in the M.2 SSD. So it's a very simple process. You don't have to worry having a precision tip screwdriver. You don't have to worry about stripping a screw, dropping a screw. It just locks straight in there in place, and you're good to go. And then you would reattach back your M.2 heatsink, and you're set. So it is a very nice feature. So when you're taking a look at motherboards and you see essentially that functionality, that is what we're referring to when you essentially see that M.2 Q latch based design. Okay, and I will check there in a moment, guys, for any other kind of questions that we might have. But we have got that 3 M.2 based SSD support. We have an isolated audio design with the Crystal Sound 3.0, Thunderbolt header support, and ARGB headers, which are also on this board as well, along with additional front USB ports, which can be great for things like AIO coolers or front USB connectivity or things along those lines. Okay. Let me quickly see right here if we got any questions. Give me 1 second. So let me just see right here before we keep moving this along. Hey, Logan. So actually, this is covering, since the formula was already released, if you're looking for a deep dive in the formula motherboard, make sure to check out our Z690 AMA live stream, where we actually covered all of our launch Z690 series motherboards. Now, if you've got a specific question on the formula, feel free to ask, and I can definitely help to clarify that. We will be talking about our 3 new specific Z690 boards in a little bit. So specifically, we've got the ROG STRIX Z690-A DDR5 version, and then the TUF Gaming 6690 Plus DDR5 version, but the formula has already been actually released, and we already dived into it in our actual original Z690 based live stream. So you can check that out, and it will cover actually all of the ROG Maximus series motherboards. So the Hero, the Formula, the Apex, the Extreme, the Glacial, they are all covered. Hey, ROG Ghost YouTube. I'm not sure I saw your question, but if you want to go ahead and rethrow it up there, I'll do my best to go ahead and see if I can respond to it when possible, okay? Hey, David, I would actually recommend that you take a look at the actual PCDIY Facebook group. I can tell you very confidently that almost all the issues that I've seen with users that are experiencing 4DIMM configurations, it's because they're using actually a mixed matched memory configuration. It's not due to that there's actually a memory issue on the motherboard. And to be very clear by that, I actually talked about this a little bit earlier in the very beginning of the stream. DDR5 specifically offers much higher frequencies. And what we're seeing is that users are actually buying DDR5 memory kits. So an example right here is here you have the Extreme board. You can support 4 DIMMs, right? But they'll buy like a DDR5, 5600 megahertz, 6000 megahertz, and they'll buy 4 DIMMs. And then they'll run that, and then they think that they can enable an XMP profile. It doesn't work that way. The XMP profile is designed for 2 DIMMs, not for 4 DIMMs. So I would pretty much guarantee that what would happen is that if the user cleared the CMOS and loaded the profiles, the board will post fully with 4 DIMMs without any issue, but it will be running at generally probably the baseline frequency, which would be 4800 megahertz. And then when they enable the XMP profile, that's where the issue occurs. And that's because the actual frequency that is supported when you increase density and rank and channel population goes down. This has always been the case for DDR4 and for DDR5. It is never equal. It's always going to be less than with a 2 DIMM configuration. So on Z690, like in a 2 DIMM configuration, you can easily go from like 4800 megahertz up to like 6000 megahertz. The memory controller is quite robust on Intel's 12th gen series CPUs, but in a 4 DIMM configuration, you're probably going to be closer to somewhere around maybe like 4000 to like 4400 megahertz. Some of the memory controllers that are out there, which is variable, may be able to support some higher frequencies, but that's not a guarantee. This is also clearly noted if you actually look at the QVL-based information when we validate the number of DIMMs and different frequencies. So when I've actually worked with users in the community that have posted these inconsistencies, they are really not aware of understanding that you can't use essentially a mixed memory kit and then say take the same profile. But we've seen the same type of issues in the past with prior generation platforms, Intel or AMD. So it's important to understand the way that population, density, memory rank, frequency all kind of play a part. And also, like I said, the difference between a 4 DIMM configuration and a 2 DIMM configuration in terms of the frequencies that are supported. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay. Hey, Theory. No, right now we don't have any plans to release a DDR4 based mini ITX motherboard. We just talked about one of the new mini ITX based motherboards that we're going to be offering, which is that B660-I, which will be essentially a lower cost offering compared to the Z690-I. But as of right now, those are going to be our 2 focused mini ITX based models. Okay. Hey, Logan, I don't want to take up too much time in this stream focusing on, like I said, boards that we've already covered, but we actually have an AIOC guide that actually specifically shows you how to modify the optimization slider, have a CPU target value, target temperature value, or a voltage value. But I would tell you that you don't generally need to be worried. A lot of users incorrectly understand the way that voltage gets applied. We don't use a static voltage, meaning that the voltage is sustained. It actually will drop under load, and it's also a per core voltage, meaning the voltage actually only will increase relative to the certain cores that are also running at a higher frequency. So if, for example, you have that 1 or 2 cores that are running at 5.3 gigahertz, the voltage will be increased for that. And it's what's also called an adaptive voltage, which is in addition to the voltage that's defined by the CPU. It's overall quite efficient and quite effective. And it's done through hundreds of CPU sample analysis. So we feel very confident in terms of actually it offering a reliable, usable voltage threshold that is not actually excessive. But of course, the options are available to you if you want to tailor them. And again, we do have an AIOC overclocking guide that we already have on our YouTube channel, which I actually walk you through how to take advantage of the different options within AIOC. Okay. So let's get back here to our ProArt board. Again, very similar to what we talked about with the ROG STRIX boards. These are using power stages on there to be able to ensure stable and reliable operation. Again, the power components here are really more than we need, especially for the class of power requirements that we have for a non-overclocked base CPU. But keep in mind, as I noted a little bit earlier, our B660 series motherboards do support our performance tuning option for power limits that we call ASUS AEMP, which will allow you to essentially extend, enhance the power limits, giving you better performance. So like if you had a 12400 that you installed on here, you could actually get better performance by enabling that, and actually having higher power delivery and a more efficient thermal design with better heat sinks can be beneficial in that regard, okay? These are what are referred to as dual contact heat sinks, which essentially just mean they make contact with both the key power components like the power stages as well as the inductors. They also are large and really solid in terms of their overall thermal dissipation performance. You also have flexibility in terms that you can move these M.2 based heat sinks to different locations. So depending on how you arrange your actually M.2 based SSDs on this board, where again, you can support up to 3, 1, 2, and 3. You've got some flexibility that you can swap them out. This can also be useful depending on the drives you purchase, because some M.2 SSDs might come with their own heatsink, right? OptimM2 just has to do what's referred to as our kind of topology or a design for a memory, which helps to give us very good memory interoperability and overall great overclocking performance. So again, because B660 does allow you to have overclocked memory, this can also be beneficial to give you an improvement in terms of performance for some multi-threaded applications. So some content creators can benefit from it instead of maybe running something like a 3200 or 3600 megahertz kit of memory, them running, 4400, 4800 kits of memory might actually be beneficial to them, but it does depend on the application. We talked about that DP alt mode feature. This is a cool feature right here where that front USB-C header, you'll see right here is a PCIe power connection, and we actually have a specialized chip on board that gives you quick charge for support. Essentially, this will support up to 60 watts. So if you want to be able to connect, essentially supporting devices, you can essentially have much faster charging performance. Now, do keep in mind that the chassis does have to support essentially this type of power requirement, but if it does, it's great because you can plug things like your phone, you could plug actually even a tablet, you can plug in a laptop, where if you have a laptop that's like a 65 watt power charging or something like that, you could actually charge it from the front of the system. So this is a pretty cool feature. It's one that right now might not necessarily be utilized, but as we use more and more high performance USB-C devices, it's nice to be able to offer a much higher level of power output for those class of devices as we move in the future. And this is also going to be an exclusive feature that you'll see here across the motherboards that we talk about, okay? That dual LAN implementation, right, where I talked about 1 gigabit LAN, 2.5 gigabit LAN. And again, some people might wonder, why would you have two? The most common scenario would generally be maybe one to have for your local internet-based connection, and then another for your intranet. So one essentially is going out to the internet, and the other might be connected directly to like a 2.5 gigabit NAS, right, that you might have, and essentially giving you better, higher speed performance for your local network environment. So that is a nice level of flexibility and functionality. Now, one other really big difference that we have on the ProArt Creator boards is that they do offer kind of what is referred to as an out-of-band management type of option. This essentially means that you can have kind of hardware level monitoring when you move away from the system, which is pretty cool. So if, let's say, you left your system rendering, it was rendering some video and maybe doing a lot of batch conversions for photos, and you went out to kind of maybe walk your dog or maybe go take a bite to eat for lunch, you could actually bring up the actual web management page and actually check the temperatures of your system, how your system is actually running, and have actually some advanced low-level access to the way that this system works in certain hardware-level controls. So normally to do this, it does require far more advanced specialized controllers that are built onto the motherboard. But one of the kind of features that we have introduced within our ProArt series is giving creators and giving prosumers and professionals more flexibility in how they can access and control their system. So this is a pretty cool feature that, again, is going to be specific to the ProArt series of motherboards. Hey, Hector. So yeah, you make a good question right there as far as the 60 watt power charge required PC turned on. I will have to double check on that. So I'd recommend if you can email me at pcdiy@asus.com. I do believe that there should be an option within the UEFI that should enable what's called S5 charging support. So in that regard, it should be able to essentially work, quote unquote, like when under like a sleep or hibernation type stage, but I would have to confirm on that. So normally, yes, to be able to have access to that, I would default say yes, you would have to have the system powered on. But for some of our other quick charging supports in the past, there have been options to essentially enable that charging support under different types of S states, or essentially different types of power states. Okay. For the M.2 based SSDs, like we talked about, just a quick recap, you can support up to 3 drives on this motherboard. So you can see 1, 2, and 3. And again, recapping essentially the speed support: PCI Gen 4x4, PCI Gen 3x4, and PCI Gen 4x4. So it's quite flexible in that regard. Hey, JBM, and why is this charge feature available on Z690 motherboards? It is available on other Z690 motherboards, but it is on our Maximus series motherboards and our ProArt series. So not on all of the motherboards, but it is clearly noted when the motherboard does actually feature that. So as I noted, though, if you're looking specifically for that kind of high-speed charging support, it is specifically on ROG Maximus series. You can find that feature, as well as on the ProArt creator board, Z690. Can you charge a phone with 60 watts? Assuming that you had a phone that had support for up to 60 watts, most phones usually are going to be like in a 15 to 30 watt class rating. And it depends a little bit on what's called the power specification. Different phones can sometimes use different types of power specifications in terms of how they initialize and how they distribute their power. But assuming they meet the, I think, what's called the PPD power requirement, yes, the phone could actually support essentially ultra fast charging support. So sorry, let me go right here. Let me just answer this one question before I finish up this the creator board. So give me 1 second here. Troll Station, you're asking here. I have an ROG Z690 Extreme motherboard with 64 gigabytes of 6,000 megahertz speed and an XMP profile. As I noted, what you would want to do is, again, you haven't actually confirmed whether or not you're running 2 DIMMs or running 4 DIMMs. There's a few things to keep in mind with any type of overclocked frequency. The baseline official frequency for memory is 4,800 megahertz. Any frequency out of that is never guaranteed. The motherboard, we can design it to essentially be able to support faster frequencies, but it is largely also influenced by the memory controller and the CPU. Now, we've generally found that probably 80%, 85%, maybe even a little bit more than that, most CPUs should be able to actually run memory up to 6,000 megahertz. But there are some differences with different IC vendors. So an example is differences between SK Hynix, between Micron, and between Samsung. And there's also, like I said, a percentage of those CPUs that will not be able to reach a 6,000 megahertz divider. For you, it's actually very difficult. There's no way for you to know whether or not your CPU can essentially reach that memory divider. It is a little bit of a guessing game. So you may be able to actually run at that divider. And like I said, in most of our testing, after hundreds of CPU samples, we find that most CPUs can reach 6,000 megahertz in a 2 DIMM configuration. That's not possible in a 4 DIMM configuration, but it is possible in a 2 DIMM configuration. If you're running into issues, of course, the main things you would want to do if you're only running 2 DIMMs is, 1, make sure you are using the actual correct prioritized banks. That's the banks that have asterisks. And there is a big difference, especially at 6,000 megahertz, between the non-prioritized banks and the prioritized banks on the motherboard. So that is 1. 2, make sure you do have the newest UEFI updated on the motherboard. And then 3, you can check to see what is the range of your memory controller and how good it is. So if you actually enable the XMP and you find that the board is not stable at that 6,000 megahertz divider, what you would want to do is clear the CMOS, load the actual memory, set the XMP divider, but manually then drop the memory divider and go to one of the other values below 6,000. You could start off at something like 5,400 megahertz and then check post boot, run a stability test. You could use the integrated memory test, take for instance in the UEFI that we have on Maximus boards, and check that. And you could scale up to begin to see where the actual what's called threshold is, right, in terms of the performance of your memory divider and the CPU support that is defined by your memory controller. All right, hopefully that answers your question there. Let me go ahead and finish up though here with this ProArt board. As we talked about here, this board, just like the prior B660-A does support our Thunderbolt 4 add-in card. So this is the add-in card right here. It's very simple. You can see right here, it just installs into the PCI slot, then connects to this corresponding header. And then you can have up to the 40 gigabits that Thunderbolt 4 does allow for. Keep in mind that is only with Thunderbolt 4 based devices. A lot of users have confusion that if you plug any device in there, they think that that can support those faster speeds, and that is not correct. You could take like a 20 gigabit based USB device, and it would not be able to run at that native speed because Thunderbolt does work differently than USB, even though they are interoperable. So there are some kind of things that you do have to kind of keep in mind in that regard. So that is important. But if you do have Thunderbolt-based devices, docks, monitors, SSDs, NAS type devices, this is outstanding in terms of that performance. You have, of course, DisplayPort support. You can support up to 100 watts of power if you optionally connect, of course, the PCI Express power connector, and you can have extensive daisy chaining support as well. And of course, rich connectivity that you have on the board where you've got USB 3.2 Gen 2 internally. That is a little bit of an upgrade. Remember, on some of the other motherboards, they don't have USB 3.Gen 2 by 2 on the internal USB-C connector, right? So some of them might only be like a 5 gigabit connection versus this faster connection that you have here. So do keep that in mind, where you can see right here, we've got USB 3.2 Gen 2 by 2. Then you've got your standard USB 3.2 Gen 2, right? USB 3.2 Gen 1, and then your USB 2 ports. So really, you've got a very far-reaching range in terms of really having kind of all of the fastest connection standards that are currently available on this motherboard. You also have the ASUS AI noise canceling technology that we talked about with the ROG STRIX boards. And again, this can be customized, where you can see you have different levels of filtering that is available. And this can be matrixed to any microphone, right? So whether you have a headset, whether you have a USB mic, it doesn't matter. Whether it's a 3.5 millimeter mic, right? Or as a USB based mic, you can have the post processing applied from our ASUS noise canceling support. And it has very, very low CPU overhead. And actually, our testing, it performs better in terms of the actual overhead processing compared to, say, for instance, something like RTX voice. So there is some definite benefits in terms of overhead consideration, depending on what you're doing. This goes into kind of the aging and validation, where we do extensively test the uptime and runtime, and that's important for, I think, more prosumer and professional type motherboards, where you might be running these systems for a longer period of time, rendering content for an extended period of time, or maybe running compute-based workloads or things along those lines. And then just some of the kind of features that are kind of nice, we talked about previously with the integrated I/O shield, right? We also have the Q latch design that we demoed a little bit earlier, and a lot of RGB connectors that, while a lot of people that are doing kind of a more prosumer professional build usually don't use RGB, but if you do have 4 headers that are on here. And again, remember, the headers do support multiplexing. So if you want to put a splitter on there so you can have more RGB devices, it definitely got you covered. So that is a recap there of all the specifications for that board. And the price here on the ProArt Creator board, let me go ahead and double check that. Is going to be, actually, I don't think I have it right here. If Juno is still in our stream, hopefully Juno can go ahead and confirm for me what the actual price will be for the B660 Creator. And remember, this is a DDR4 based motherboard. Okay, so next up, we're going to get to our TUF Gaming SKUs. And TUF Gaming, we're going to have a H670 based motherboard that we're going to talk about, and we're also going to have some B660 based motherboards. And then from there, we'll lastly just quickly touch on our new Z690 motherboards, and we'll be wrapping things up. But we still got our TUF Gaming series to go into, and I think a lot of you guys are really going to be a big fan of these TUF Gaming series. So let me see if we got any questions before we get moving along here. Hector, that is correct. No NVMe PCI Gen 5 support. So to have native PCI Gen 5 support is quite a bit more expensive for the PCB and the topology design on the motherboard. So that is the reason why that is reserved for the higher end Z690 series of motherboards. And even in Z690, not all of them will have PCIe NVMe Gen 5 support. So it is important to make sure that all of our Maxima series motherboards, whether it's done through an add-in card or physically on the motherboard through the slot, will support that. And also the ROG STRIX Z690-A will support PCI Gen 5. These boards will all give you PCI Gen 5 for the PCIe slot for your graphics card, but not for the PCIe for M.2 based SSDs. Now, you could theoretically bypass that by having an M.2 based SSD that would use the primary physical by 16 slot, which is a possibility if you're using the iGPU, but outside of that, they do not have PCI Gen 5 M.2 based link configurations that are set for them. So that is important to keep in mind. Yeah, so Troll Station, then everything that I communicated to you, you're running 4 DIMMs would be exactly what I talked about. You cannot run you cannot run 6 gigahertz in a 4 DIMM configuration. It's not possible. The memory controller cannot support running at that speed. Ultra high speed, the highest frequencies that we've been able to see, like I said, maybe you could get into close to maybe 5,000 megahertz if the memory controller was really strong, but that is even still debatable. Like I said, 6,000, 6,400, even 7,000 megahertz. That's all possible under a 2 DIMM configuration. The scaling that we're seeing in DDR5 is extraordinarily high, and the density support is fantastic because you can have higher density configuration. But there is always a reality that you have to account for overclocking limitations that are get defined by the CPU and by the memory controller within the CPU. So that is just the reality of overclocking. Hey, Logan, I don't want to dive too much into that AIOC question. I would take a look at the video. I talk about the optimism slider and how you could actually tune it if you want to, along with, like I said, some of those other options that I talked about. Or if you have more questions, make sure to join the PC DIY Facebook group, okay? Hey, Juno, thanks. So Juno did confirm the price for the ProArt Creator board that I just finished recapping right here, the B660 Creator D4, that is $239. So that is the price that we're going to have for that board. So fantastic board, again, for those of you who are going to be looking at. And again, if you want even a higher class board, we do have the ProArt series in the Z690. And even if you're maybe interested in AMD, we also do have B550 and X570 ProArt ProArt or kind of prosumer professional series boards there as well. Hey, Bambos, what's the lowest price for an Intel 12th gen motherboard? It depends because you could go down really, really low price point if you talk about some of the H610 based motherboards. That's almost getting down to like literally like about $100. But in terms of kind of, I think for probably most users, I think probably the sweet spot is probably going to be something like maybe the Prime H670 Plus, which is $160, would be, I think, a very good option right there. Or the or the TUF Gaming B660M Plus Wi-Fi D4, which would be $179. And actually, I'm going to show that TUF Gaming board and the Prime board here in a little bit. So don't worry, we are going to get you covered there if you're wondering about even kind of a little bit more of a lower cost option. Okay. Okay, so let me just see. Hey, Bambos, yes, you can run the 1200 series on H610. Ideally, you would really be hampering the limitation because, of course, there's more memory channel limitations and some other factors on H610. I'd really recommend that if you're going to be running a 12400, you want to look at B660 or H670 to make sure they're getting the best performance possible from that part. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and go next to our TUF Gaming series. So we have gone from ROG STRIX, we've gone to our ProArt, and now let's go ahead and jump into our TUF Gaming lineup here. And we will keep moving things along right here. Let me see right here. Sorry. Hector, the Thunderbolt 4 add-in card, actually, I believe has already been out. You can double check with Juno if we have any expectation on restock availability, as I don't know for a fact right now if it's available across the channel. But because we actually are ready to release that, it should actually already be available. But Juno can help to hopefully confirm that for you in a little bit, okay? And then Troll Station there. So yes, in your situation, what I would probably recommend is it really depends on what your preference is. If you need the actual memory density, then you would want to go with the advice that I recommended, which is manually dropping the memory divider and finding what the fastest memory divider is you can run with a 4 DIMM configuration, which, like I said, is probably going to be somewhere between 4,000 to 4,400 megahertz. If you're lucky, maybe you can get closer to 4,800 megahertz. It could be possible, but like I said, the percentage of IMCs that can run that is definitely on the smaller side. So I don't necessarily would say that I could feel 100% confident in that regard. But for most users, especially for gaming, users just don't need more than 16 gigabytes, and even 32 gigabytes is really an extreme amount of memory. So from my perspective, I would say 2 DIMMs at 6,000 megahertz would be the way that I would be running my system, right? That's like how this kind of system would be set up, right? That's my recommendation, but ultimately that really comes down to your preference as far as what you feel is needed based on your system usage in terms of the amount of memory that you're running and utilizing consistently. Okay, so let's go ahead and get ready to jump into it. Hey, Lynchy, we're going to talk about the TUF Gaming based motherboard and the ROG STRIX motherboard here in a little bit, but Gino should hopefully be able to give you the feedback there in terms of the target release date for those new TUF Gaming and ROG STRIX version motherboards that are going to be DDR5. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in here to our TUF Gaming models. So this is going to be H670 and B660, okay? And again, remember H670, quick recap again here. Pretty much the chipset block seems identical to B660, but remember the DMI link is twice as much in terms of the bandwidth. So there's a higher level of bandwidth available to you in this actual link. And that's going to be beneficial if you're running like more M.2 based SSDs. So not even one, and maybe not even two, but if you're maybe looking at like 3 or something like that in that type of configuration, that could be more advantageous. You also have more general PCI lanes. Z690 has the most, followed by H670, then followed by B660. So there is a difference in terms of the number of lanes that are supported. And you can see right there where it's like chipset advantage right here, where you can see H670, right, up to 12 PCIe 4 lanes, right? And then you can see 6 PCI 4 lanes, right? And then also this link interconnect for the DMI 4 is going to be different between B660 and H670. All right, so for the boards that we're going to be talking about here, we've got these for you, and that's going to be 3 boards, which are going to be the H670, which is going to be ATX, and then 2 micro ATX. And these are going to be essentially the same board. It's just the difference right here. You're going to see one is a DDR5 version and one's a DDR4 version, okay? So first up, we're going to take a look at the DDR5. That's the highest performing kind of SKU that we have there. You can see large, robust VRM heatsinks, power stages across the board here. So again, you're going to be very stable, reliable. You can run everything from that, Core i3 to the Core i9 on there. It's not going to be an issue. It's going to be stable and reliable. And again, if you want to take advantage of the ASUS AEMP feature to be able to extend the power limits and have better performance for these unlocked parts, these boards will definitely be able to accommodate that without any issues. You can see rich connectivity, right? HDMI 2.1, DP, USB 3.Gen 2, USB 2 right here. Then you have your 10 gigabit USB-C. You then have high-speed USB Type A. Then you have USB 3.Gen 2 Type A, 2.5 gigabit LAN. We then also have Wi-Fi 6, multi-channel audio with optical output, an integrated I/O shield, 4 RGB headers on here. Again, those RGB headers support multiplexing, so you can add splitters there. So if you want to have 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 RGB devices, that is possible. You can just add a splitter to an RGB header in the same way you can do that for fan headers. Okay, DDR5 support that's on here with this motherboard also supporting that AEMP technology, which will allow you to easily take non-XMP memory kits and be able to get more out of those memory kits by taking advantage of special profiles that we have. So an example is taking like a 4800 megahertz kit and then being able to run it at like 6000 megahertz. Okay, and then solid, of course, M.2 expansion support. You can see 4 SATA SSDs and then dual M.2 heatsinks, and you can see 2 M.2 SSDs with PCI Gen 4x4 support, right? One here and then one here. So, and then you still even have Thunderbolt support, which is on this micro ATX board. And then you also still have our TUF Gaming isolated audio design on here. And TUF Gaming does also feature, not necessarily as an advanced audio suite, but it does have our TUF Gaming audio suite, which includes DTS audio presets and an EQ band, which can be customized. So it does still give you some better options than, let's say, our most basic motherboards, as well as, like I said, it's in between, also between the ROG STRIX and the TUF Gaming series. So if we step over to the DDR4 version, right, pretty much almost the same motherboard, right? It's just you're going to see there's a little bit of a difference here. One is going to be no secondary M.2 heatsink that you're going to have on this board, right? You're also going to have the difference between, in terms of the memory supported, DDR4 versus DDR5, but they all have the same rear I/O connectivity with the Wi-Fi, with the 2.5 gigabit LAN, with the high-speed USB connectivity, with the Thunderbolt support. So you pretty much get almost everything. It's just going to be a little bit different in terms of course, the memory support and then that M.2 based heatsink. When we go to the H670 board is pretty well stacked right here. Oh, sorry. Let me go ahead and give you the prices right here on these TUF Gaming boards. Juno can probably also help to confirm for us here. The TUF Gaming H670 Pro is going to be $229, and then the TUF Gaming B660 M Plus Wi-Fi D4 is going to be $179. So somebody was asking about a lower priced option. This is going to be a very good option coming in at $179. Okay. And I will give you guys a quick image here of the H670 Prime board, which would be one of the lowest cost options, which would be $159 in a DDR4 based version. So the upgrade here by going to ATX is you just get more M.2 SSD support, where you can see you've got 3 M.2 SSDs, and these are all PCI Gen 4x4. That's the benefit of really H670, is having more PCI lanes. So that's the reason why, compared to some of the other boards that might have had 3, where it was PCI Gen 4, PCI Gen 4, and then PCI Gen 3, you can see here that we're running 3 PCI Gen 4, right? Again, this is not an issue. Even if you literally had a SATA-based SSD, M.2 SSD, it would still be very fast and responsive. Even if you're running PCI Gen 3 by 2, your overall performance for booting, application installations, patches, game responsiveness is pretty much almost going to be identical. You really only see too much of the difference in maybe heavier workloads, if you're doing a lot of file transfers, if you're doing a lot of copies, and of course, if you're benchmarking the actual SSD. Okay. For this drive here, HDMI 2.1 display port. You have your USB Type-C right here, and this is a 20 gigabits port. So this is a very fast USB-C port, 20 gigabits compared to your standard ports, which are usually going to be 10 gigabits. Your USB Type-A ports, USB Type-A ports, 2.5 gigabit LAN, Wi-Fi 6, multi-channel audio with optical out, the TUF Gaming isolated audio design with the TTS audio package, the same RGB connection options, right? With a total of, you can see right here, 2 addressable headers right over here, and then another set of 2 more headers, with one being addressable and one not being addressable. Again, you can multiplex those if you want. Your USB 3.Gen 2 by 1 Type-C port, front USB 3 port, and then you can see also your SATA ports right there for your traditional base SSDs. Okay. And again, this board is going to be coming in at $229. Let me just see here. Will there be any DDR4 version of the Strix F or E? So no. For DDR4 Z690, we have the Z690-A, which is the only DDR4. Z690, all of the other motherboards are going to be DDR5. And for North America, as we talked about earlier, the only motherboards that we're going to have for North America will, under the B series chipset, will be B660-A, right? And that will be the DDR4 version. So you're asking about the F or the -E. We will not have any other versions of the Strix B660 series in North America. So for F and E, that would generally be, I would assume you're asking about that for the Z690 series, and those would not be. So if you want DDR4, you would be taking a look at the TUF Gaming model, or you would be taking a look at the ROG Strix model. Okay, so let's go ahead and just kind of recap some of the items here. Again, we have high performance Dr. Moss power stages right here. So efficient, reliable, stock or overclocked, more than enough power, whether you want to, again, run like a 12400 up to a 12900 part in there. If you want to take advantage of the ASUS 8 feature to unlock the power limits, you can have very, very good performance with this increased power delivery that we offer here, along with the very good quality thermal design. So those VRM heat sinks, which are just like the other boards that we talked about, which make dual contact to really be able to keep effective and well in control, temperatures for the board. Again, whether it's going to be stock or using that Intel 8 function, that ASUS 8 function for extending the power limits. And like we talked about previously, it also has the ProCool power connectors, which help to offer better efficiency and higher level of amperage handling, where you can see the solid pin design is 10 amps versus the traditional, which is 7 amps. All right. StatCool 3 design, what people kind of wonder about what that means is that as you go to a CPU that essentially has more cores, more threads, there's actually a higher level of sustained current power handling, right? It's required. So you could be going to 100, 150 watts, maybe even more than that. Of course, Z690, it's even more than that. So actually having a motherboard that actually has a 2-ounce copper substrate within the PCB actually allows for better thermal dissipation performance for the actual socket in the PCB. So that's part of the reason why some of the more premium boards, if you see that there's a StatCool 3 Plus, that's actually what it means, is that the integration of copper as part of the PCB layer, which helps to even provide better thermal dissipation performance for that socket area. Okay. We've got that high performance VRM heatsinks that are on the board. Again, these are dual contact, making contact with the power stages and the inductors that are on the board, and M.2 heatsinks on there as well. Fan connectors, similar to the other motherboards that we talked about, these are all supporting multiplexing. So if you want to put a PWM fan splitter cable on there to run 2, 3, 4 fans, all from one chassis fan header, from a CPU fan header, you can do that. But for these CPUs and these configurations, most users are going to be running those out-of-box Intel coolers, or maybe running a basic, tower heatsink, or maybe a 240 millimeter AIO if you're really taking advantage of like a Core 7 or Core i9, and then maybe using the APE feature to extend the power limits. Under that scenario, it can make sense to use an AIO cooler, but in most situations, you don't really need that many fan headers. And really, from a chassis configuration, having 2 front intake fans and a rear exhaust, it's about all you need. You don't really even need kind of top-mounted fans aggressively, but you do have the ability, again, to multiplex them, and you also have AIO fan headers that are available there if you want to connect simply things like our TUF Gaming LC series coolers or our Strix LC series coolers, which are really simple to connect. Just one cable from the pump housing to the motherboard, and then your cables from the fans, and you're pretty much good to go. And then optionally the ARGB cable if you, of course, wanted the ARGB lighting. For the, of course, the configuration that we talked about, if you remember, for these boards, we are going to be talking about that one of the micro ATX is DDR5, the other one's DDR4, and then the ATX is DDR4. So when we're taking a look here at this memory configuration, this is just talking about our overall design and being able to give you that overclocked flexibility for running high frequency DRAM if you want to be able to run that. But again, with these being a little bit more budget oriented, probably for most users, they're probably going to be running for DDR4 somewhere between 36 to maybe 4400 megahertz memory. And then for DDR5, probably, I would say probably 4800 to maybe the mid 5000s in terms of DDR5 based availability. But if you can take advantage of the AEMP function and you can get like a stick of memory like this, which is like a 4800 kit with the AEMP, you could be running at much higher frequencies, like 6000 megahertz, which is pretty cool. PCI Gen 5 support, which we already talked about. Of course, the PCIe and Gen 4 support depends on the motherboards as far as the slot configuration layout for all the slots. So do check the specification tables. Thunderbolt 4 support is also available here on these boards. 2.5 gigabit and Wi-Fi 6 is also here as well. And the M.2 Q-latch design is also on here as well. ASUS AI noise canceling, which we also already talked about, right? And this is the DTS audio suite, which is nice. It has a multi-band EQ that you can go in and kind of tailor the audio. You also have specific presets which are tuned for different types of scenarios, whether it's going to be music, movies, or games. And it actually does make a noticeable difference. And it's one that I'd recommend trying it out, seeing what your experience might be. And we did talk about Armoury Crate a little bit earlier on, but all of these motherboards will all use the new version of the Armoury Crate software. You can see it has an entirely new UI that gives you full system monitoring, CPU frequencies, CPU temperatures. It gives you integrated fan control. It also gives you full RGB lighting control that's built into this. If you also want per LED lighting control for advanced ARGB devices, we have the Aura Creator Suite, which is an optional secondary suite, which is only for RGB lighting and control. And then, of course, you have other things integrated like the two-way noise canceling, the driver and utility functionality, which is also built in there. So it is a quite complete and comprehensive suite. And this is our latest version, version 5, which just launched for the Z690 based platform a couple of weeks ago. So it's been really solid. A lot of people really like a lot of the new functionality and feature set. So quick recap here, comparing older H570, H670, DDR4 to DDR4, right? It's just higher speed memory support. The ProCool power connectors with supplemental power connection, PCIe Gen 5 support for your graphics card, HDMI 2.1, additional support in terms of faster speeds for your M.2 based SSDs, right? More ARGB headers, our safe DIMM design, right? Which is just a more secure and reliable design for memory, and then more fan headers. And then for the micro ATX boards, you of course can transition up to DDR4, DDR5, even faster speeds. Same thing, improvements with the ProCool power connector with an auxiliary connector, PCI Gen 5, HDMI 2.1, the move up to dual PCI Gen 4 support for M.2 SSDs, much faster rear I/O for Type-C connection. So instead of Gen 1, you have Gen 2 by 2, right? And then more ARGB headers, safe DIMM design, and more fan headers. And if you're not aware, we also do have a wide lineup now of TUF Gaming accessories under the ASUS lineup, where we have TUF Gaming AIO coolers, we have TUF Gaming power supplies, and we've even got more products that we'll be coming out with later. And we've, of course, got a great peripheral lineup. So similar to kind of our ROG ecosystem, where we've got tons of ROG products, we also now have a very expansive ecosystem of TUF Gaming accessories and products, and also a lot of partners that work with us in what's called the TUF Gaming Alliance, where you can get branded products that very much are complementary to the TUF Gaming design. All right, so I'm gonna double check here and see if we have questions. I'm then gonna show you guys the Prime Series motherboard just for reference if you guys want to see that motherboard, because that is going to be one of the lowest cost options for 12th Gen series motherboard support, if that's what you're looking for, and just double checking on anybody else's questions right here. So for ATC Chori, I'm not sure how to pronounce the name. If you could clarify your question a little bit more, I'll try to see if I can clarify that for you a little bit more. For RAID, again, you remember you'd have to be on the H series chipset for RAID support, and generally I don't recommend it just because you can add a lot of complexity to that, and some of the controller firmware is really optimized best to work in one single drive volume. But if you do want to do it, we do have options within the UEFI BIOS firmware that allows you to go ahead and toggle on RAID support for chipsets and boards that do support RAID configurations. Ultimately, if that's something you want to do, though, of course, it's up to you based on your usage scenario. For the AIO pump header, we've actually covered this in a recent video that we have on our ASUS YouTube channel, which talks about kind of a lot of the kind of design features that we have on our motherboards, including the AIO pump header. But the AIO pump header, you don't need to configure it. If you essentially have an AIO cooler that connects to the AIO pump header, the default output configuration that is recommended by AIO pump manufacturers is actually at 100%. It's not actually modifying it. Some users want to modify it for a noise level, but its default output configuration is designed to align with its best performance and overall best operation. So you don't actually need to change or tune or do anything. Once you connect that actual 4-pin cable to the AIO header, that's it. The only other thing that you would have to configure would be the actual fans that come from the fans that are attaching to the radiator, which you would generally connect to the CPU and the CPU OPT headers on the motherboard. Okay. Hey, Giles, we actually covered the collaboration with EK extensively in our Z690 AMA, which talks about not only the the Maximus Formula motherboard, but also the Glacial motherboard, which are two of our collaborative projects that we've had with EK. So if you actually want to find out more about those motherboards, make sure to check out the Z690 AMA live stream, where we talked about all of the Z690 high-end Maximus series motherboards, including our EK collaborative-based products. This microphone, you can't get it anymore, but this is one that we came out with a while back. It's called the ROG Magnus. It was a really cool USB multi-capsule based microphone that had different cardio patterns and a USB hub and some other kind of cool RGB lighting on it, but you can't get it anymore. So it's one of the benefits for working with ASUS. Okay, so let me go ahead and show you guys here the the H670 board. So give me 1 second here from our Prime series. So for those of you who are going to lastly kind of be maybe wondering about a board that's going to be a little bit more entry level, and then I'll lastly just kind of show you the Z690 lineup and we'll wrap things up, guys. Is here, this is, going to be the H670 based chipset, and this is also going to be from our Prime series motherboards, right? So let's go ahead and show you here. This is going to be the Prime H670 Plus, and this is going to be one of the lowest cost options at $159. So you'll see that this board does not have it as an advanced power delivery solution. So it has what are called discrete MOSFET and drivers, as opposed to where we have on the higher end boards, where we have essentially more advanced power stages and larger, robust VRM heatsinks. This board will still give you enough power delivery to be able to be stable and reliable. If you want to put, like I said, one of these CPUs, like a Core i3, a Core i5, something like that, you don't have to feel that you're not going to be able to run the board reliably. But definitely there is a difference between the class of the power delivery and the thermal design that we're going to have on some of the higher end boards. But here, if you want just a stable, reliable board that you're going to run at stock, you're going to put that Intel default cooler on here. This is a really great option to be able to get all the benefits of 12th gen series CPUs. So have that high speed USB connectivity, PCI Gen 5, multiple M.2 SSD support, a lot of those nice things, right? But at a much lower price point. So 159, this is a DDR4 based motherboard. If we kind of just quickly recap some of the points here, you still get your, your QLED diagnostic. You got ARGB headers right here. You got dual USB 3 front headers right here. No internal Type-C, so keep that in mind. SATA ports right there. One M.2 PCI Gen 4. Another M.2 based SSD right here. M.2 based SSD and M.2 based SSD. So you can actually see 1, 2, 3, 4. This is right here. This connection, though, is going to be a little bit different. This is an M.2 connection, which is the NGHF, which would be for if you wanted to add Wi-Fi to the motherboard. So technically, from the actual usage from a storage configuration, it's 1, 2, 3, so 3 slots, and this would be then to add wireless to the motherboard. Okay, you still also have Thunderbolt optionally in here. Still more ARGB headers. Multiple fan headers, USB 2 internal headers. So it's still a very solid board to be able to get up and running. It's got a cool, clean white aesthetic. So it's definitely not a bad option. Like I said, that pairs well with, like I said, these non-overclock based parts. And you can still also have overclocking support for the DRAM. For the I/O, you'll see that it's a little bit leaner, of course, than other boards right there, but you still get HDMI, DP, high-speed USB-C. You can see right here, these are higher speed USB 3.Gen 2. High-speed USB 3.2 ports right here, and then USB 2 ports, and then your LAN, and then your audio. So that would be right there, the H670 plus D4, and this one comes in at $159.99. Okay. So let's go ahead and wrap things up here with just a quick introduction for the new Z690 boards that I want to show for you guys, and I will make sure if anybody's got any last questions right here. So let me go ahead and show these off to you. The first one is going to be this one right here, and this is going to be the ROG STRIX Z690-A, and this is pretty much the same motherboard that we have right now, which is what I've shown to you guys here, which is the DDR4 based version, but it's going to be essentially just a DDR5 version. So for people that wanted a white motherboard but at a lower cost than something like the Maximus Formula, this board will give you DDR5 support, and you're going to get really a huge upgrade here, right? This board is going to be stacked, right? It's got super high performance VRM, large robust VRM heat sinks. It's got tons of course, ARGB connections, USB Type-C, USB 3. USB Type-C Gen 2 by 2, Type-C header right there, your traditional 30-pin USB 3, your traditional SATA 6G. You can see M.2 SSDs right here, and right here. So 4 M.2 based SSDs, tons of fan headers right there, Thunderbolt header, the high-quality ALC 4080 audio codec on there with the Savitech amp that we have on there, optional temp sensors on there. A lot really packed into this motherboard. And again, if you check out the Z690 AMA live stream, we talk about this board in depth, and pretty much it's going to be the same board. It's just not going to have the it just won't have the, it'll be DDR4 versus DDR5. But one feature I do want to show you guys here is going to be specifically on this board that's pretty cool, is going to be the Q release feature. So right here, you're going to see that there's this little button, and let me go ahead and show you this a little bit closer. So give me 1 second to get this position for you guys here. So give me 1 second, and we'll see if we can show you right here. Okay, there we go. And I'm probably going to need actually something to raise this with. So give me one moment. Okay, so yep, that should work right there. So if you see you guys right here, we have, of course, this button right there, and that's the Q release design. This is where, of course, you would install your graphics card. Traditionally, many of us know when you install the graphics card, it can be a little bit difficult to remove the graphics card. So the really cool thing is here, you'll see I've got the graphics card. I'm going to install it. And normally, you would actually have a little bit more of a challenge being able to access getting that graphics card, installed, right? So you can see here the depression button. If I actually had the heatsink installed, it would be hard to access. But the nice thing right here is that you've got this Q release button. and I can hit this button. And when I hit this button, it will actually just allow me to remove the graphics card. So it's a really simple and easy way to be able to access the graphics card with that type of feature. And that's another just ROG innovation. It's just like so many of the things that ASUS and ROG have been the first to be able to design and develop on motherboards. That is a really cool feature that when you go up to something like the Z690 series, the ROG series motherboards, you get that really cool release feature. So that is going to be a feature that we have on that motherboard. So again, that is going to be the ROG STRIX Z690-A DDR5 version versus the current DDR4 version. So if looking for a lower cost DDR5 in white, this is going to be a fantastic choice. Let me see if we have any questions here before we go over to the TUF Gaming model. Does the add-in card for the no, you don't need to run it in RAID. That is literally a kind of a almost like a JBOD card, right? So it's optionally designed to allow you to go ahead and just have multiple SSDs, right? Depends. Most of the ones that come have a single slot. There are some that have multiple. Depends on the actual drive configure. Excuse me, the add-in card that's present, but it does not need to be set up in any type of RAID to be able to access. Essentially, just install the M.2 SSDs, install it into the slot, and then initialize the drives in Windows by, of course, running disk management and partitioning and formatting the drive, and that's all that's required. Ziki, the price for, yes, the TUF Gaming B660 plus Wi-Fi D4. Let me go ahead and check that for you. TUF Gaming B660M plus Wi-Fi D4 is $179. Okay. The 6-pin power connector next to the 24-pin power connector. Yeah, so we talked actually about this. Let me go ahead and just bring up an image here before I actually show the TUF Gaming board, and I'll recap this again. But we did talk about this on our ProArt Creator motherboard that was on the B660. But let me go ahead and show you guys what our user is asking about here. And I believe what you're asking about here is this connector. So specifically, he's asking, why do we have this supplemental power connector, right? So you have the 24-pin, and then you have this 6-pin power connector. And the reason why is this 6-pin power connector is an auxiliary power for the actual internal USB-C front connector on the motherboard. And when you connect this, this will actually allow it to have quick charge for support on that motherboard to actually be able to enable up to 60 watts of power. So this is also a feature that we do have on select Z690 motherboards in the ROG lineup, which would then give you essentially that higher wattage or essentially higher ability to charge power devices through the front USB-C connector. So that is specifically what that connector is. It's an auxiliary connector. You don't have to have it connected. The front USB-C port will still work. It's just you won't be able to have the maximum power output without that connector. Okay. All right. Let's lastly go ahead and show you guys here the Z690 TUF board. And this is going to pretty much be identical to this board here. This is the TUF Gaming Z690 board, right? And this is just going to be the difference where this model is DDR4, but we're offering a DDR5 version, and it will have two versions. One will be one without Wi-Fi and one with Wi-Fi. So again, if you want to find out about in-depth in this motherboard, check the Z690 live stream that we have, the AMA live stream. We'll link it into the chat, but it covers all the features. Fantastic board in terms of its features and functionality. A really, really great option if you really want to go to great performance experience. Probably the only thing that some people would wonder is like, what is one of the main differences of getting this board versus, let's say, purchasing the ROG STRIX board? Is the ROG STRIX board, along with our Prime series, would offer our AIOC technology, which if you want to find out about that, you can actually check a video that we've got on our YouTube channel. But essentially, it is a fast, easy, and effective way to be able to easily overclock your CPU specific to your cooler. It will actually learn your cooling configuration and then custom define an overclock that's specific to your CPU. It does it easily and effectively and efficiently. It uses actually what's called an adaptive voltage policy. and it can really provide you a really big performance bump. We actually showed in our overclocking demo where you can see that you can literally get 3, 4, 500 megahertz increases depending on the per core overclock based on your cooler and your CPU configuration. So it is a really cool feature. You can still manually overclock if you do go with the TUF Gaming model, but that AOC feature is a pretty cool option. Okay, so this is going to be the TUF Gaming board right here. And you can see it's got super large, robust VRM heatsinks, right? Dual contact based design. It's got tons of ARGB headers in terms of your connections, just like the other boards that we talked about, 4 in total, with one being a legacy header. You can use multiplexing connections that are on there. Lots of fan headers right there. You can have 1 and then, 2, and then last another M.2 SSD. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 M.2 SSDs on this motherboard with Z690. So that's really awesome. PCI Gen 5 support. This board does give you that internal Type-C header as well. You have the front USB 3 connector right there. You've got, of course, your SATA ports, 2 here and 2 right here. And safe DIMM connections right here. And again, this moves up to DDR5 versus the current model that we have being DDR4, right? And then the TUF Gaming isolated audio design on this motherboard. Okay, so that really, I think, wraps up most of it. Let me go ahead and just double check here. But for the overclock, it does nothing. Sorry, Evo07, but for the overclock, it does nothing or what? If you're asking essentially, again, for the TUF board, you can fully overclock it. You just have to do it manually, or you can use a basic overclocking option that we have within the UEFI that is kind of a legacy option that we called OC Tuner. It's not as anywhere as advanced or intelligent in terms of taking advantage specific to the CPU and to the cooling configuration, but it can give you a nice little just bump in terms of the frequency. It's a good moderate kind of OC-based option, but for probably most users, they would probably prefer to manually tune it. So the OC experience is not necessarily lower. You could have pretty much the same overclocking capability and experience on the TUF Gaming board as you could on like a Maximus Formula, Maximus Hero, or the ROG STRIX board, right? The difference is that just from an ease of use standpoint, the AI overclocking functionality is quite a bit more easy in terms of just tuning it, adjusting it, or just kind of clicking it and having it be specific to your system. And the important part is people confuse this with software. It is not software. It's happening on a hardware level. It makes all the changes directly in the UEFI, and it maintains those. And it actually it learns over time. So like if your cooler went down, the overclocking would actually get adjusted. It would go down because it would detect the cooling performance is no longer working to the same level. So it is quite an impressive feature and function. And again, we have a video that dives into exactly how it works, a demonstration of it to show you if that's something that you kind of want to take advantage of. But the TUF Gaming board is a really, I think, outstanding choice for a lot of users that are out there. The Auto OC video, JBM, it is already available on our YouTube channel. Let me go ahead and just link that in the chat as I go ahead and get ready to wrap things up here. I'm going to go ahead and just double check it if anybody's got any last questions. So give me 1 second here. And let me see if I can link you guys to that video right here. Yep, I got it right here. And I will link that in there. So this is a full AIOC overclocking guide. And this would apply to pretty much any one of our motherboards that features our AIOC technology. So it's demoed specifically on our Z690 motherboards, but even if you're maybe using an older motherboard that has it, it would still generally be applicable. Hey, William, the DDR converter, we don't have actually any plans to produce that. That was literally a prototype that kind of got picked up by the media. We're monitoring, of course, feedback from users, but it was actually shown by one of our amazing ROG performance engineers as far as just a lot of things that we're always working on in terms of kind of prototypes and concepts. But as of right now, that is purely a prototype conceptual based product. So if you're interested in getting a motherboard, you do want to make sure that if you're going to 12th gen, you pick the right board based on the memory configuration that you want. So DDR4 or DDR5. Do not plan on being able to change or configure the memory. Yep, the Ryujin 2 is an awesome, fantastic cooler, and I'm not even running different patterns or animations on there. There's so many different options that it has available to her. I really like the 8-64 integration, where you can actually run 3 different stat values. So you could see like voltage, frequency, and fans, or temperature. Or you could break it down to do a lot of really cool stuff. It is the biggest screen that right now you can get out there. I think 3.5 inches, so it's pretty cool. Lynchy, yes, the board that I just showed, that was an ATX board. So if you remember, and when you go back and kind of watch this stream on demand, there was 4 total TUF Gaming boards we showed. We showed one ATX H670 board and then 2 micro ATX motherboards, right? They were B660, and then this is Z690, which is also ATX. And this motherboard, specifically the Z690 plus Wi-Fi DDR5 version, will exist in 2 versions, one being Wi-Fi and one not being Wi-Fi. So actually, in total, 5 motherboards, TUF Gaming motherboards that we've shown here. Okay, so I think that probably covers everything in terms of that. So hopefully that gets you guys covered in terms of any questions or comments or kind of just points of consideration that you had in mind when it comes to B660, H670, and our new Z690 series motherboards. If you guys have more questions, feel free to go ahead and drop in the comments below, and we'll do our best to go ahead and follow up as we take a look once the video gets automatically archived, and we'll do our best to go ahead and follow up with that. And again, if you guys have any kind of questions or comments or feedback, consider joining our ASUS PC DIY Facebook group. It's a great community, and you can tag me if you have more questions regarding any one of our motherboards, features, functions, specifications, designs, and whatnot. And also a big shout out to Juno from our team to help to go ahead and give you guys additional kind of responses in terms of availability and pricing. But make sure to go ahead and check out the link in the description where we'll include all the motherboards that we had detailed in this, including their price point. And if you guys are looking for a hands-on performance demo for some of these motherboards, including that new ASUS AEMP feature, then that'll be coming in the not too distant future when we get some of these actual B660 motherboards on hand. So with that, guys, take care, take it easy, enjoy the rest of your day, and best of luck with your guys' builds.